All right, so thank you very much, David. All right, it is a little past the hour of 7 o'clock, and this is the Master Plan Steering Committee dated on May 22nd, 2019. And while we're waiting for additional paperwork to be printed and trees to be killed, we have some housekeeping that we can do, which is the acceptance of, or the review and acceptance of the March 7th meeting minutes that were sent to everyone before our last meeting. Does anybody have any concerns or questions?
I just looked at them real quick.
Okay.
Yeah.
Second.
George, okay. Any discussion? Okay. Hearing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. And then there was also the minutes from, was it
May 9th?
the May 9th, that's right, they just came out. May 9th meeting.
Yeah, I was upset none of my quotes were in it, but,
Okay,
yeah.
okay, all right, duly noted.
So when I read the May 9th minutes, it referenced some additional information in the attachment that I couldn't find, but the minutes that I read didn't indicate the approvals we gave to the sections we talked about, which I think is important, and it should reflect that. But in the text of the minutes that I read, but in the minutes,
Right.
there was a comment that said there was something else attached, but I didn't see that in what was sent out online. So I don't see any
Okay.
evidence in the minutes right now that documented that those sections that we discussed that night
We're
were
voted
approved.
on, okay.
Agreed.
All right.
We had motions and seconds and
On
votes.
everything
Do you
other
have
than,
electronically?
yeah,
And-
okay.
And those are not reflected in.
All right,
the
so we'll
minutes.
hold off, and when Kathy comes back, we'll ask to have those amended, because that is important, that's the record of.
Well,
So, absolutely.
I didn't print them. Do we need to go over them line by
The
line?
minutes?
Yeah.
No, I mean, what they're saying is the minutes from our last meeting were all about the voting on the goals, I'm sorry, the recommendations for at least 4 of our areas. So they weren't in the minutes, so we're gonna have to ask to have the minutes,
So we're not gonna accept them as written.
right, because otherwise a record of our votes is not going to be there. Okay, so we'll wait on that. All right, so then, I'm gonna just pass it over and have Donnie and Jeffrey give us a little bit of a recap on where we're headed tonight.
Okay, great. Well, thanks. It's always great to be back and thinking about next steps and moving the community forward as we go down this journey together. So it's been really wonderful. I thought we were really getting into the rhythm of going through the different chapters last time when we met together. I know the first chapter's worth of recommendations. It took us a little bit of time to go through them, and I think once we got through a few of them, we quickly realized that we're focusing on some of the changes that happened and reflecting upon where you want to spend your time commenting back and forth on those. So I think what we'd like to do is go back to that same process where I know Donnie has the documents up on the screen like last time. We've been able to track the changes of everything that's happened to date. We can talk about what's changed, what hasn't, and sort of quickly and efficiently go through these and spend your time the way that you like to. My guess is that we'll probably spend most of the evening tonight finishing the final 4 chapters that we did not get a chance to go through last time, which are land use, economic development, housing, and natural, cultural, and historic resources as well. And then I think, what else? It would just be good to think about, as we go through these, like last time, pausing, voting, making sure the committee is adopting these as we go through as well. Donnie, any other macro things in terms of getting us ready to just dive right in tonight?
No, it sounds like a bunch of you have already seen the results of the survey. Those have been posted to the website. So if you have any questions on that, let me know. But we did, so go ahead.
Oh, and we don't even have to do it tonight, but last time we went through like the priorities and what people thought was important, and
Yep.
someone asked next time, can you bring us what people didn't think was important, what fell at the bottom of the list?
Oh, sure. I mean, we have
Yeah.
that here. We can bring it up as we're going
And we don't
along
have to
with
talk
the.
today, but I remember that came up.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good talking point as we're going through and reviewing the goals and the recommendations. So right now I have the top 5 over here on the left-hand side, but I think certainly, I also have the results of the survey
Right.
that I can pull up easily as we're going through, so you can see the lowest vote getters.
And I think we did discuss that a little when we had the little color, it said what percentage they were, because and it kind of waned off, but the yellows were the highest rated.
Yeah, we can bring it up again, right
So-
where we left off, Donnie?
Yes.
So they were there.
Those are for the goals, so
Yeah,
if we want
okay.
to revisit the goals, we can.
Okay,
But the recommendations are just gonna be straight percentages.
Okay.
Yeah.
all right, perfect, okay.
And then just the last, just for reference, I know Kathy put out a hard copy of what we're gonna refer to tonight, so everyone has the same exact document. It does reflect the chapters that we went through, where we sent that out, I think, a day or so after our last meeting with an update, so that we have those ones accepted in here as well.
All right,
And I
great.
guess it's up to the committee on where you'd like to start out of the four. I know, Donnie, I think you have land use up and ready to
Yep,
go, if that's your
we
preference.
might as well start with land
We
use,
can dive
yep,
right in.
absolutely. Okay, so, on land use.
So the first goal, prioritize the preservation of valuable natural resources and open spaces while still accommodating the social and economic needs of the community. The first action, conduct a cost of community services study to prove the economic value of open space and natural lands.
Okay.
I
Well-
just have a question. I'm good with the first two, but on the goal, I just have a question, because I am on the planning board, and will be faced with some of these decisions, where it says prioritize the preservation of valuable natural resources and open spaces while still accommodating the social and economic needs of the community. When I'm faced with the choice, which one wins, you know? Like, do you pick the land use because that's so important, but then we say the social and economic needs are important too, like, I think as a planning board member, that would be hard, like, do you use LU 1 and 2 to find the parcels that have the most open space value? And if that's the highest, then that wins out. I guess, I picture myself in the seat going, okay, I've got this question now, which one do I pick?
Well, I think it depends on the project that's in front of you, and
Yep,
and the reality is that that's why it's a five-member board, so that you can discuss and come to some type of consensus. I think the goals have to be that broad. I mean, they can't be any more specific than that, otherwise we're pigeonholing ourselves into only one option.
Yeah, this is basically a statement that says, strike a balance, right?
Yep.
So, that's a tough job you've got on
Okay.
that committee.
okay,
You
so
know,
then it'll
good
be up
luck.
to, it'll be up to us to decide, that's
The
okay.
specifics
think
of a
that's the
particular
reality.
situation, yeah,
Yep.
you just evaluate that and.
And we might be able to use 1 and 2 to come to that decision, because,
Have we ever done a cost of community services study? Is that such a thing?
It is.
Yes.
But you haven't done it.
Okay.
We haven't done it. In the
Okay.
past either, like,
All right, so can you give,
It's not a difficult study to conduct.
okay, so just get, in a nutshell, what is the benefit of having that as one of our recommendations to achieve this goal?
Well, I think it's a talking point, it's a data point. You can, when you're making that decision and trying to balance the preservation of land versus the social and economic needs of the community, or just a single project that's in front of you, you can say, you know, is the value of this project worth more than the value of this land as it is preserved?
Okay, all right. Any other questions? Are we doing all right, David?
He needs to speak up.
Who?
Yep.
Or Donnie?
Yes.
Donnie, okay. Hey, Ashley.
Great.
I asked.
If I might add to that real quick, Fran, I think the other part is, it's pretty common to understand when you're providing all of your town-wide services, what is the cost maybe by person or by population or age category? So just understanding where you're spending those dollars. Usually this comes up around affordable housing, where people say, look, we want to add more affordable housing, what is the cost of providing those services? School-age children, what is the real cost per pupil in our school system? So to be able to have those facts and figures in front of you, you can realize when you want to do economic development growth, maybe around mixed use or certain housing type, is there a real impact to your services or not, and what are those costs as you're trading off those issues?
All right, all right, so,
So-
go ahead.
Yeah, so back to the point you made, that's
that
great
was-
data for you to help make those decisions, and
Yep.
so great, it's good.
What is this?
Alexander's comments.
Oh, Alexander's comments, okay, there you go.
Thank you. What
Okay,
are they?
all right, thank you. These are from the Historical Commission's representatives and their concerns. Okay, all right, so, does anybody have any more questions about that? Does someone want to say we should vote to lock it in as a recommendation on how to achieve the goal number 1?
I vote we vote, lock in goal 1.
Okay.
I mean, not goal 1, recommendation 1.
Okay, no worries, okay,
Second,
thanks, John. Okay, all those in favor?
Do-
Oh, I'm sorry.
Does that mean we're accepting all
No,
seven?
no, we're
No,
just
just
doing one,
number one.
one at a time.
Oh, I thought this one.
No, the recommendation for the goal. Okay, fabulous, okay.
Sorry,
Procedural.
just if I could ask, is that what we did the last time?
Wasn't it?
I was gonna say,
I
I
don't
think
think
you,
so.
you
No, we
debated
don't?
all
Oh,
of
my
the
goodness.
actions,
All right, I
and
thought
then
we
once
did
you
them
were
all.
clear with all the
Right.
actions as amended, you
Ah,
went back.
Right.
All right, my
That's
bad.
why you threw me a little bit.
All right, so good thing you're sitting next to me.
And I think what we're gonna do up on the screen
even-
like last time is we'll track what the changes
Yeah.
are.
Right.
All right,
Reflect on all of them and then vote on
okay,
them.
sorry, my bad. All right, so go on to number 2.
Alright. Build off the 495 Metro West Development Compact to inventory local priority development areas, or PDAs, and priority preservation areas, or PPAs, to guide future development activities in town, as necessary.
Is that generated by the 495 Metro West Partnership?
Yes.
Okay, so they're in sync?
Yeah, it's a plan that they developed, I
Okay.
don't know, 5 years ago.
Okay.
So I just wonder what build off means, but that, yeah.
Yeah, so
No, I think that makes sense,
Is everyone okay with moving on to the
Great
next one?
organization.
Again, more data for making decisions.
Right, there you go. Okay, number 3.
Review the existing zoning bylaw and Conservation Commission regulations for needed revisions to strengthen protection of natural resources.
Oh, absolutely. We should always be reviewing them and revising them.
But isn't that what the zoning commission and the conservation commission are for?
No, the planning board actually has the responsibility of developing the zoning bylaws. The zoning board just implements them. As far as the conservation, it's state, it's at a state level at a minimum, and then, is it still under the planning board's?
No.
No, it's the Conservation Commission itself?
Conservation Commission itself has the option to get a little heavy duty on their their bylaws if they want. They can go over and above what the state requires.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, George. Anybody else have any questions or concerns about recommendation 3? Okay, moving on.
Identify flood hazards, storm inundation, riverine flooding, and develop updates to land use planning tools such as zoning and subdivision regulations to better define development objectives in these areas. Conserve, through the purchase or restriction, properties that would expand and improve flood control and hazard mitigation.
Any questions or concerns? Okay.
I guess,
It's wordy.
it's kind of weird the way it's worded, better define development objectives. The objective wouldn't be to develop in these areas, cause they're flood hazard areas. Is there a better way that we can say that?
We'll just need to strike development.
I guess so, yeah.
Okay. So the suggestion is to remove the word development and to define objective.
Okay, more
Yeah.
paper, thank you.
How do people feel about that?
I'm okay with that.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Ashley. And just for the audience, just so you know, before we get to the voting for these, I'll open it up for comments if you have any.
Where feasible, seek actions that contribute to the quality and diversity of wildlife habitat, such as preventing habitat fragmentation and preserving wildlife corridors when large tracts of land are being developed, as well as protection of water quality.
I think the word is tracts, TRACTS,
Right.
but otherwise.
Ah, yes.
So what are we doing with Alexandra and Norm?
Well, that, it looks like they're already put in here.
Are they?
Well,
But they're not still historical followings.
Additional
Okay. Okay. Stand down? Okay.
well, East Alexandria, one under LU5 is in here.
Yeah, no, that's on all of ours.
Somebody put them in there.
Yeah, so Donnie, correct me if I'm wrong, I think all of the red that you're seeing in the document is post the last public meeting that we try to consolidate the comments, and I think from the survey that reflected potential changes that the committee has not yet adopted. So the red are things for additional consideration.
Right, and then the blues on each of them are from the individuals who sent the comments in. So you'll see the one that says Norm Corbin, down on LU2, he has made comments.
Okay.
Because his are in blue. So we have one from Norm, Alexandra, Amy from last week, and then an email from Mark Donahue.
And then
And
then
then-
another set from Justin,
And-
Frame.
He's actually on the main one that we have, yes, yes,
Yeah,
So-
he was the first one that I passed out.
right.
So, you know, we didn't have time to take everyone's comments and then put them just on one document.
No
so
worries.
That's why you got more.
Okay, that's fine. We'll just try to make sure we keep them, you know, we keep looking at them. All right, so, other than the spelling on
Tracks.
tracks for number 5, does anybody else have any concerns or, recommendations? Okay, moving along, Donnie.
Okay. Develop a stormwater management bylaw to require stormwater management and erosion control permit. Monitor stormwater maintenance plans created for the operations and maintenance phase of real estate developments.
Okay. All right,
I love this one.
you do? Okay, all right. All
Monitoring, I love it.
Yeah.
right, there you go.
Thanks for saying that.
right, on to number
Permit.
7.
Permitting,
Permitting, not permit.
yeah.
All right, we have our wordsmith. Thank you, Ashley.
What's wrong with tracks and
The T and the K.
Versus K.
Okay, Donnie, on the 7th one?
Maintain the town's conservation fund to ensure resources are available to protect open spaces as opportunities arise.
Okay, so there were no outlying comments, so we liked it last time. Everybody still like it? Okay. Is there anything up there that you want to share with us, or we're good on that?
No, I mean, unless you have any particular questions about, I mean, I know the text is hard to read here, but.
I just have a quick question about LU1, the cost of community services study. What form does that take? Is that like a single instance for a particular project where you do that evaluation, or is that some kind of tool where you plug in data and you get some kind of?
Yeah, it's like a townwide, we
Yeah.
use all the data from the assessors, and
Yeah.
you can do it one time, you can do it a bunch of times, but it's,
Yeah.
kind of just a formula, it's a spreadsheet.
Okay, that's essentially what I'm asking. Thank you.
Okay,
I have just one question.
sure.
I had a note in here, but, for LU 1-3, it talks about reviewing the existing zoning bylaw and conservation. I actually wanted to bring up this year with the planning board to review also the groundwater bylaws. And
that's
would that
part of-
fall under that?
That's part of zoning.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, I just didn't know if it had to be added in there, but if it doesn't, I'm good.
Okay, fabulous.
It's,
This is Norm.
does it exist already?
Yeah, we do have a groundwater bylaw, but
No.
So it would just be
Uh-huh.
revised.
it's trickier than other towns, like there's all the wording.
Yeah,
Most
I'm,
towns are
I'm
like,
looking at them myself.
you know, I think we need.
All right, okay, so, before we go ahead and vote on, the 7 recommendations for the first land use, I just want to ask if anyone in the audience had any questions or concerns about what we just discussed. If not, we're going to move on. Okay, fabulous. All right, so, hearing none, now we're going to take a vote on the 7 recommendations to achieve goal number 1 in land use.
I move we approve the 7 recommendations as modified to include the LU.
Second.
Strong, okay, any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor? Aye, all right, thank you very much. Okay, on to number 2.
Alright, the second goal under land use, enhance downtown by promoting a pleasing and welcoming appearance, one that promotes a sense of place, enabling it to become the community's proud central gathering area for residents and visitors alike.
Okay, that's the
First-
goal.
First action under this goal, conduct a design study of the downtown to help focus ideas and develop a clear vision for the area.
So Norm had a whole bunch of comments.
Not on not on number 1, though.
Oh,
yes.
Yeah, he did.
Downtown.
That's right.
Okay,
And then he also has, I don't, whatever's easiest for him, or.
okay,
Then
right,
he had an email that just said, well, let's combine all downtown,
okay,
so just,
All right.
you know, so people are aware that's part of his comment.
okay. Well, okay, so land use number 2 is about downtown. It has 8 recommendations. I think we we owe it to that project to go through all 8. If we want to consolidate them, that's fine, but I think that,
Well, I think he's maybe implying it's elsewhere in the document, maybe.
on his email,
In other, yeah, I'm just,
all right, as you.
but, yeah.
No,
I mean, it
I
is a
think it
dominant
means that the
theme.
word downtown is in a lot of different places. It's in like all 8 recommendations.
Right, but this is a land use goal
Yeah.
specific to downtown.
So, I mean, I think as we
Is
go forward, we can
housing
always decide that maybe a recommendation doesn't need
Right.
to exist because we think we've covered it here, or?
I think it's too late because we've already approved the goals and there are more than one about downtown. So his
Right.
recommendation that we consolidate that much is not realistic.
Well, I think his suggestion to consolidate was to consolidate several recommendations under this goal under 2-1.
Yeah, but in his email, he says, it shows up everywhere, and we have
Yeah, yeah.
one recommendation for
Right.
downtown.
All right,
I
so-
don't know if he meant the whole.
All right, so
No,
again,
you're
let's,
right.
let's go through all 8 and see whether or not we feel that within this one goal, we want to leave 8 recommendations, or we want to wordsmith them into less than 8. I think as long as the intention doesn't change, it's not going to matter. Okay, good, Donnie.
All right, so the second action, conduct a visual preference survey with the community to determine what kinds of developments it prefers in downtown and update the town zoning bylaw to accommodate these preferred development types.
Right, well, I think that, I mean, we want to hear from the community before we make any decisions, so I think that makes sense.
So the design study would probably incorporate the visual preference survey, or what is it,
Good.
usually? Okay.
Okay, all right. Is there merit to blending them together?
Well, why don't I read all of the
Okay.
actions and I'll read
Okay.
Norm's suggestion and then
Okay.
maybe we'll
There you go, all right, thank you.
update zoning to better plan for mixed uses in downtown that can promote and support walkability. Investigate density bonuses and/or density transfer credits in the town zoning bylaw that promote reasonably higher densities in the downtown in exchange for public benefits. Develop a program to promote the planting and sustained growth of street trees, landscaping, and other green infrastructure in downtown, in concert with the development and fostering of partnerships, including with the Northborough Garden Club. As part of the program, undertake a tree inventory along the major corridors in town. And I think he also, yes, explore opportunities to create walking paths, routes along Brooks River, and connecting historic properties to enhance the beauty of historic downtown. And then his recommendation was to strike 2 through 6, consolidated into conduct a thorough evaluation of the downtown to help focus ideas and develop a clear vision for the area. This evaluation should include a design study, revised zoning options, visual preference survey, and landscape design walkability.
I don't necessarily agree with that, because they don't all need to be done together. Some of these things could be done sooner rather than later, some of them would only be done, with a design study. I just,
So you prefer them being separate, separate recommendations?
I think
Okay.
so, and they're
All
very
right.
different.
Yeah,
Yeah,
okay,
I would agree.
all right.
I think he's on the right path by doing the evaluation first,
Mhm.
by doing the study of preferences, what the infrastructure is, what the plus and minus. Design is when you hire a designer to produce a document or a design and use charrettes and whatever. So I think you wanna keep the actual design separate from the
Okay.
information gathering.
Okay, all right. So, since these are not prioritized in any order at the moment, keeping them separate sounds like it makes sense, so,
Again, I'm not familiar with these terms, but a visual preference survey, is that something that's done by surveying town boards, raise of hands, I mean, I don't
Yeah,
know.
so what usually goes into that, it might be, I've done a couple of them, there might be 30 to 50 images, and what you can do is rank, and you pose questions. Does this type of development fit within downtown Northborough,
Who are you asking?
the community? And you would say
Yes,
rank
right.
these in terms of.
How's that done?
Survey.
Well, just like we did our survey.
Just like
Right.
the survey we done, where it'd be like yes, no, or you can rank them 1 through 5, if you think it's applicable or not. From that visual preference survey, you would try to narrow down the types of massing, uses, character that you think is appropriate, and from that, you would actually turn it into something that you can act upon. So it's based on visuals and what people like and so forth.
I actually think, I like the idea of having these be separate. This is an interesting one because again, downtown comes up so often. Everybody has sort of, some people don't like shutters. And, so I think this opportunity to kind of display images, I think it's a really important way to get feedback from the community about, what is it you expect, I'm voting for the picture of the water park, by the way, just so you guys know, so.
And one actually lesson learned that I went through is that with this visual preference, you focus more on the look and feel. You don't necessarily worry about specific land uses or
Right,
density or
right.
things that might be less tangible.
It's aesthetics.
Then you can turn that into, well, if you like the way that looks and feel, by the way, that happens to be 10 units per acre. I didn't know that. That's helpful to know, so you can debunk some of those myths about density, land use, character.
Oh,
It
interesting.
helps you
That's a
get
great
down
point,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay, all right, so go on
We
to.
do have a document, the design review guidelines, it does show you examples of what we like and don't like, which were prepared by Judy Barrett and the design
Right.
review committee. So there is a seed there for people to refer to.
Yeah, the very first time we put together design guidelines for commercial businesses, we hired a consultant, as Tom said, and part of that study, or part of putting those guidelines together, was we did it was a mini, it was with the design review committee, but it was a visual preference, survey. And years ago, or really years ago, like back in the late 80s, when we first put site plan into the zoning bylaw, we did a visual preference survey also. Today's would be far different than what we did in the late 80s.
But doesn't that, the results of that kind of make some of these obsolete, potentially? Maybe people don't want flowers and trees downtown. Maybe they want steel and smoke window, smoke glass. I mean, I don't know.
Well, it's possible,
We're
but.
talking about planting trees, we don't know if trees are effective or what people want.
All right, so let's,
I don't
well,
know,
yeah,
I just.
I mean, your point's well taken, so if we look at number
this is a
5.
master plan.
Right,
It should be.
all right, so is number 5 too specific as to what we wanna do with downtown, where we're saying we don't even know what we wanna do?
Number 5 goes far beyond appearances, though. It's really, it's an important mechanism for sustainability. So
Okay,
And my sense is that we're not necessarily gonna do all of these things, but I think it's important that a lot of good discussion has happened in the last year about things that we ought to consider, and to lose them by starting to delete them out of a plan doesn't make sense to me. Eventually, committees will be put together and boards and commissions will look at these things, they'll decide what makes sense, but I don't think we should drop important thoughts that came out during that meeting.
It's difficult to foresee how we're gonna approach this in detail, right? Committees coming together to investigate some aspect or another, it could be broad, it could be narrow, could be short-term, could address something long-term. I think preserving the detail here keeps it all in front of us, right? It's a record of what we've discussed and everything. And over time, as we go to approach these, we may decide, well, we're gonna do a study, but we're gonna consolidate this and this and this and do them all together, I think it gives us flexibility to decide how we wanna approach it when we go to implementation.
just one suggestion, and I don't know if this is, anybody's gonna like that, but could we put in LU 2-2, use this survey to inform 2-326? Something like that. I agree with Justin.
If I
Alright.
could jump in real
Yeah.
quick. Usually in the implementation chapter in the matrix, it'll say when you're implementing a certain action here, is it short-term, mid-term, long-term? It would also say, should this action be done in concert with other ones, and it would list the critical ones that
Oh, okay.
it would relate to.
Okay.
Sometimes they happen within a chapter, sometimes they happen outside of a chapter to better cross-reference between why you're doing parallel initiatives at the same time.
Oh, okay, that's helpful.
That
Alright,
could-
so
that
we
could be
don't
one
need to
place to
call it
put it.
out.
So you can call it out in here, but you can also put it in the, make sure you're highly coordinated in the implementation chapter too.
okay, all right, so the 2 more,
Two more. Before we move on to the two more, I just want to note, so amongst the actions under this under this goal, action or recommendation 2-4, investigate density bonuses or density transfer credits, received just 4% of the vote. I don't know if we want to deliberate on that, take it from.
Well, all right, so I think because sometimes people hear density and they don't think downtowns. They think about the density of multifamilies or apartment buildings. I mean, I would guess that's why people might think that's not a good idea, but if you don't have density, you don't have a downtown. I mean, I think, in my opinion, as Jeffrey said, the look of the building, what do you want it to look like? What's behind the doors is what you know, depending on what you want. You can have housing in a building like this, and it still has the same aesthetic from the outside. But I don't know why it didn't get it, but that would be my guess.
And I think it goes back to that dichotomy I mentioned. I mean, again, you know, want
Because-
affordability, want people living downtown, you know, all these things that people want. Well, how do you do that? You have to deal with it. Density's probably gonna be one of the ways you solve that. So I think some of this may be just, you know, again, it's the reason we're on a committee, right? Is to provide some direction as well. I mean, so I think it has to exist.
Well, we have investigated density bonuses, so it doesn't mean we're gonna do it.
Mhm.
Where it
Right.
says promote, can we do consider? Because it sounds like, you know, when we're investigating, we'll consider reasonably high densities, but it doesn't mean we have to promote them.
No.
Depending on the way it comes out. Like, people might do the visual survey and say, I don't want high density downtown, I don't like the way that looks, because the main thing I've heard all along since I've started on the planning board is people love the small town charm of this town, and they don't want more traffic, and they don't want more density, so let's see what comes out of the survey.
And see, and that lies, as John said, people don't want density, they don't want traffic, but you don't have a downtown if you don't have closely built buildings and people to walk to these buildings. I mean, otherwise it's just a greenway through the town on Route 20. I mean, think about what a downtown looks like. A downtown looks like buildings with apartments above them where people walk. They go to.
Mixed use.
Yeah, I mean, that's what a downtown would be, and you don't have that if you don't have buildings close to each other on small pieces of property. But I think that's your point of what people are saying is why this would have gotten low grade, but it's misguided in this one section. But, I mean,
It might come up that they don't want it, like, because I was thinking about it today too, and not to go, but the downtown, like, being on the planning board, people coming in front of us, they're doing lawyers' offices and accountants, and they're not coming in with restaurants, so what is the housing gonna serve? Like, hopefully in the future, I know what we're trying to do is bring in restaurants and walkability, and, but if we don't have any of that, say no restaurants come in and,
Well, we don't know that, I mean, the
Right.
idea's gonna be,
Right.
once this plan goes into effect,
see what happens.
So
But I
put
just
some
know all
together
those
to
spaces
consider
are
how
being
to
eaten
attract.
up, so it's gonna be hard to.
Yeah, so maybe we just put a that could promote.
Consider.
well,
well,
You know,
investigate is the key wording, it
Right.
doesn't say promote density bonuses, it
Right.
says investigate
Right.
density bonuses and density transfer
Right.
credits.
that do
But
promote.
if you did do something about them, they would promote reasonably higher
Right,
densities.
right, you're not promoting it, that's.
So the first verb there, investigate, you know, says that there's nothing saying we're gonna do this, but if
Right.
we do investigate, decide we wanna do it, what we're gonna get.
Yeah.
is We're gonna promote reasonably higher densities.
I'm
mean,
comfortable
I
with it.
mean-
I mean,
Right.
What
And I
they
s-
are incentives, so we could just say incentivize, I mean, it's the same thing, probably has the same negative connotation to people who read it. But
Right.
that's in actuality what they're doing.
and
Right, I just
without
want to give
surveying,
Dave,
yeah, and without, sorry to interrupt you, but without surveying people, we don't know. Density probably just means, oh, I don't want a multi-story apartment building next to my house. You know, so, you know, and I can understand why some people might react that way, but again, you know, this is that dichotomy issue, that I think we've got, that,
What would downtown Westboro be if it didn't have density around the Rotary? It wouldn't be a downtown.
Well, you can't create a sense of place unless you define it, and you define it with the use of buildings. You can't have all these empty lots or single-story structures to create a sense of place. I mean, it's just, that's why you don't have a downtown. It's evaporated, it's been destroyed.
All right, I just want Dave, because you,
I'll
okay,
get-
good,
I'll get to
okay.
it the next
Okay.
goal.
All right, okay, all right, thank you, Donnie.
So land use recommendation 2-7, Take advantage of the Department of Housing and Community Development's Massachusetts Downtown Initiative that provides services and technical assistance to communities in revitalizing their downtowns.
Definitely. Okay.
Do we have to, in all of these, kind of go into what it is? Can't we just say, take advantage of the Department of Housing, Community Development, Massachusetts Downtown Initiative? I feel like a lot of times we go into some detail on these, but.
Without a doubt.
Yeah, except for the layperson reading it might like to know what it is.
That's my biggest concern. I mean,
Okay,
Yeah.
half the
that's
stuff
fine.
we talked about in this committee, I have no clue what it is, so.
Okay.
Well, you're
I think
faking
it's
it
important-
very well, John.
It's important to have it spelled out.
Should
so.
just have
All right.
initials.
All right,
Yeah.
Donnie, number 8?
Acronyms, only acronyms.
Yeah, that'd be really great.
Evaluate.
Oh, and
how
here's one
commu-
coming up.
Evaluate how Community Preservation Act, or CPA funding, and affordable housing funding can be used to support downtown enhancement.
Okay, the only issue I have is that's also ED1 under economic development. So you need it both places. Economic development really overlaps a lot of what we're talking about with land use, because it's so specific to the downtown.
I think ED1, we should just, cut off at boards, and then you don't have that problem.
All right, well,
It
let's not
addresses-
jump to
addresses-
this, that far.
It
So,
addresses the CPA again.
okay, so to Dave's point, this is referenced in ED, in economic development. To Ashley's point, we may be slimming down economic development, so should we leave it here?
I think so, but.
Everybody okay with that?
Yeah, and,
I would do the opposite. I would take it out of here and leave it in economic development.
But ED1 talks about creating a revitalization committee, so I think that's really all you need to talk about in ED1. What they decide to do, what that committee decides to do doesn't need to be, like, potential examples of what they decide to do don't need to be in there.
But why, the LU28, Evaluate Community Preservation Act, but then it ties it to affordable housing.
Well, because that's one of the chapters, that's one of the areas of which the CPA is required to put some money.
Into affordable
Well,
housing?
Yes.
Yeah, maybe
In the
you-
downtown area?
No, affordable housing.
Okay, then why are we putting it downtown? I get affordable housing and I get CPA money, but why are we tying that to downtown?
Yeah, I mean, if you strike that, I mean, then you just think about, see how CPA in all 3 categories, or is there 4 now, can be used to support downtown enhancement.
I think we could strike that number 8.
All right, so striking number 8 completely, and when we get to economic development, ensuring that it's worded in a way where it's protected?
Oh, that's not what I said.
No? You just want, oh,
Just striking affordable
Oh.
housing from LU2-8, because CPA,
It's broader
affordable
than that.
housing is in
Okay.
CPA.
all right, well, we're
We
not
need
gonna
to
do,
just call out one category.
okay. Right, because historic is very important for downtown, you're right, okay. So on number 8, evaluate how the CPA funding can be used to support the downtown enhancement.
All right.
That, yes, Ashley?
Yeah, that's what
Okay.
I was.
Okay.
Okay,
That's good.
all right, one
And then we
second.
mentioned-
All right, one second, Donnie, go ahead.
I was just gonna say in ED1, it says in other funding. I just wonder if you wanna just strike affordable housing and just say CPA funding and other funding that can be used to support downtown enhancement. So if you're gonna streamline, just consolidate.
All right,
Yeah.
sounds okay,
Yeah,
okay,
so it's not
All
just
right.
CPA.
okay.
yeah, I just had a question, Fran. I know it got mentioned earlier about order of these, so are we not gonna worry about that?
That's correct. We are not prioritizing them.
Okay.
There's going to be another section of the report. that's talk about part of the-
They're not prioritized now.
Okay.
Okay. All right,
We'll get the response from those people.
Even though we've done things like put studies as the first actions. So, I mean, are we kind of like, I mean, we're kind of halfway there. So I just would argue some of these things like the LU27 are things that might fit up more closer to the top. That's all.
Right.
They're studies.
They're only-
Okay.
The numbers.
So we're
are
already doing
based
some of
not
this.
for Priorities.
Right.
Ordering, I would argue, but whatever.
Okay.
It's not a showstopper for me by any means.
all right, so we have our 8 amended recommendations for land use goal number 2. Before we move further with voting, is anybody out there? Henry?
Okay, my name is Henry Scolani. I have a few questions about this. One, before you struck out 8, you understand what affordable housing is per your definitions.
Okay.
It's 10% below the median cost of a house in this area, which is 460,000. That means that you're looking at, if it's an apartment that you buy, apartment is worth $414,000. You think people would buy in the center of Northborough a $400,000 apartment? I can see it along the Charles River, I can see it downtown Boston. But do you really mean affordable housing, or do you mean housing that is for seniors or that type of housing?
Okay, so we struck it from that anyway, so.
I understand that,
Okay.
but, because I didn't know CPA had funds available for that type of housing.
Sure, yeah.
But it's for people making 80% of median income or less. So it's
Okay.
people who go into housing based on a lottery.
Yeah, okay, okay, that's,
So it's not housing.
but that's the duplexes we have around town,
No,
based on people's income?
no.
It's like,
No.
it's like,
There's no
it's
income
like the
restriction.
4 units we just put into 2 houses next to Trinity Church.
Okay, yes,
Right,
okay,
right.
right.
Those were done with community preservation money. Those 4 families qualified as low to moderate income families, went into a lottery conducted by Habitat for Humanity.
And actually, Henry, we have affordable housing that is subsidized throughout the community in single-family homes in the Northgate area, in the Cedar Hill Crestwood area as well. So
Yeah.
it just means it's managed and financially supported by, subsidized.
Okay. I think when you get
Or-
to housing, I have some comments there.
Okay, all right, well,
The other-
we might
the
not
other
get
co-
there.
Okay, the other comment, when you say you want to take a survey of the trees, are you saying you want to preserve the old trees that are in certain properties?
Where are we saying?
You said,
Yeah, it's under the tree.
yeah, undertake a tree inventory.
Oh, okay.
That was on LU25.
Yeah, I think what that means is a tree warden will evaluate
Okay.
all the trees in town and determine where maybe additional trees need to be planted, where there are old trees that might be a hazard, and just making sure that there's a continuous sort of flow of trees
Right.
in town.
Okay.
Thank
The
you.
other comment I have, you want to attract business to downtown. It sounds like in some of these earlier ones, you want to dictate to the people what their building's going to look like. Is that going to keep people from coming to Northborough?
Well, that's already being done.
Well, yeah, but what do you do with the buildings that are already there?
Okay,
Those
well,
are all
that,
questions that are gonna have to be worked out
Okay,
Right.
by committees that are appointed when this thing is done.
all right,
Those
okay.
are all problems that you can't
It's
solve.
done in the
All right,
positive.
thank you.
all right, thank you. Okay, so, moving on, so we have our 8 recommendations for goal number 2. Any more discussion or concerns? All right,
We adopt these 8 recommendations for those who are listening.
all right, thank you, Rick.
Second?
Thank you, Jason. Okay.
So did we leave promote on LU 2-4? That's the only question I have.
I'm sorry, you have to say,
We left promote, not.
Because
consider.
investigate,
Yes.
we felt was,
yes. Okay, all right. All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay.
Did you raise your hand?
Yeah, halfway.
That's good enough.
Because I still wanted to be considered.
All right, all right, yeah, all
Like all the
right.
others.
Land use number 3.
Okay. Land use goal number 3, ensure Northborough's future land use will support its vision and establish community character. The first action, perform ongoing review of existing design guidelines to ensure a balance between the existing community character with new development and redevelopment, as well as consistency with the findings of the visual preference survey.
Okay, I mean, it's no different, it's been that way the whole time.
So that ties to that survey again.
Mhm.
Doesn't matter, it's in 2 different places.
It's not saying to do the survey here, it's saying to execute whatever design guidelines.
Well, it's
Consistent
saying,
with
it's
the
saying we've done the survey, so we're gonna be consistent with what the survey finds.
You already have design guidelines for commercial, business, and duplexes. And you have design guideline handbooks.
So do we need
And those
perform
would
in
be
there?
informed by the new study.
Do we need perform, or if they're already in place?
I think the idea is
This
to
is a-
revisit them based on the results of the surveys of information becomes apparent.
So do we,
Okay.
do we enforce? No, that's a bad word.
Okay.
Do we,
We're just gonna perform ongoing review of them.
It's an undertake, it's,
Yeah.
look at it.
All right, okay.
Okay.
Don?
Action number 2, Build greater awareness of Chapter 61 programs that provide tax breaks to owners of forest, agricultural, and recreational land, and grow local participation in the program.
All right, well,
Question here, is this really something the town can do? Like, is this
Well, it's,
What's the current state of the
go
art?
ahead.
I was
Good.
just,
Kathy?
actually, just like with open space, you know, we send out letters to landowners to let them know about, you know, like, you know, have you done estate planning, that type of
a,
thing.
yeah,
I mean, you could do something like that, you know, we don't now as a community, but, you know, probably maybe through the open space committee, you could,
yeah, that's
you know,
true.
if you wanted to do that.
Okay.
I'm sorry, Jason.
Well, I was gonna kind of ask, do we have Chapter 61 eligible properties or property owners who aren't already in it, if it makes sense to them?
Yeah,
We
but,
do,
yeah,
okay.
I'm
And
sure,
it's always possible that people come out,
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
properties changing.
You know, it's, depending on what program you're in, it's not a big reach to be in one of these programs.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
yeah,
So
there's still properties that could, if they
Opportunity
wanted
and
to.
potential properties that would
Yeah.
be,
Yeah.
okay, thank you.
All right, thank you. All right, Donnie?
So we did remove action number 3-3, which is the right to farm.
Mm-hmm,
So
okay.
the new 3-3, develop townwide guidelines for commercial and industrial development that promote high-quality design and considers building layout and buffer zones in relation to adjacent uses and circulation and allows for a mix of uses.
All right.
Don't we already have this? We have design guidelines for commercial, industrial, and we have buffer zones in our zoning bylaws.
Yeah.
So
And
what
we
does-
also have design standards
Yeah, I don't know what high-quality design means.
in the,
I
so
don't
again,
even-
maybe it goes back to, you know, what Jeffrey was saying, is that you check in on what you have, which may or may not still be, you know, satisfactory to people, or.
So instead of develop, review.
So instead of develop, ongoing review, or review of, annual review, or regular review,
Up
Alright.
above, we have ongoing review.
ongoing review, all right. All right,
Grammatical
all right,
correction.
well, to Tom's point, we already have these things, so we're not gonna develop them, but we do wanna continue to look at them, because we don't want them to become stagnant. Amy?
I had added with my corrections last time and enforce, because I find sometimes we do have these townwide guidelines, but they're not enforced.
But
Like
that's
you look
not
at
the master-
Dunkin' Donuts and
That's not the master
Okay, one
plan.
it's
second.
not, okay.
So,
It is in other places, we've done that, we've put it in.
enforce?
I mean, and we talked about it at the very beginning, one of the surveys was, it asked if you wanted, it had something to do with the zoning being enforced, or,
Well,
it went back to the beginning.
with,
Go ahead.
with guidelines, you can't enforce guidelines. So, you know, you can enforce bylaws and regulations, but you can't enforce guidelines, which is why the design review committee is advisory to the planning board, or the ZBA. And then, you know, once it becomes part of a decision, then it can be enforced.
No,
A guideline can't be enforced.
Okay, I just know some towns do like strict downtown guidelines.
Well, that would be if
We-
it's like a historical district
Yeah,
that you have
I
to
mean-
adhere to. But even last night, we had an applicant come before us who suggested one thing from the design review, and the planning board changed it. So we don't have the authority, you know. So it's
I don't know
only
what towns you're
suggestions.
referencing, Amy, but they might have standards.
Yeah.
But guidelines are not enforceable in
Okay.
any community. I mean, that's why they're called guidelines.
Okay, and this
They're
is
what we hope you do.
And this is actually saying town-wide, too, so it's not just specific to the downtown.
Well, again, I mean, you know, it was, because, I mean, last time we talked about this, we all got, well, we talked a lot about design guidelines, like, that we should have them, well, we have them. So again, I think if you're more general about, you know, ongoing review or something like that.
Okay, how about, just like number 1, perform ongoing review of the town-wide guidelines?
It'd be nice if the designers would read them.
Okay.
Well, that's not
Well,
our
we can't
job.
enforce that.
I just think that high-quality design and considers building layout is
Oh.
too specific.
Okay,
Yeah,
all right. So,
Yeah, I think a lot of
perform ongoing review of town-wide guidelines for commercial and industrial development. and consider building layout and buffer zones in relation to adjacent uses and circulation.
That was just way too wordy.
Yeah.
Still, I took out a lot.
You just keep it,
I like the deletion that you just made up.
yeah,
So ending
Alright,
next
see.
development,
Yep.
industrial development.
yeah,
From ongoing review, okay,
yeah.
Yeah.
perfect,
Yeah, that
Okay.
promote industrial.
Keep
Could
it
I s-
simple.
okay,
Could I substitute periodic for ongoing? Ongoing sounds like it's
yep,
Yeah, when.
perpetual and never ending.
okay.
Because when you review these, you actually call in a consultant to help you review them, which costs money, and design review has no money.
All right, so periodics makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay,
Just to clarify, shouldn't we change 3-1 to have the same terminology?
Yes.
Yes.
Being
Periodic?
periodic, yep, okay,
Nice.
Periodic might be every 5 years.
right,
That's for
right,
money.
can be
Yep.
determined,
Very
okay,
good.
all right, all right,
I just
Very
have one
good.
question, because I was trying to look through my notes, but on the first LU 3-1, when I was going over this for the last meeting, I actually went back and watched the videotapes, and we had a lot of discussion on LU 3-1, because, originally it talked about New England charm and small town feel and community character, but I feel like throughout this whole master plan, we lost that, and at the very beginning, I have this land use, and the number one thing was preserve and enhance Northborough's small town feel. But, you know, we talk about established community character, but what is that? Like, and I just feel like that's so gray, it could be anything, what's our established community character? I feel like we lost the words New England architecture or New England charm or small town feel, like, I just feel that's important to a lot of people, and I hope it comes out in the master plan somewhere, even if it's not here, because I think.
What is our mission statement?
I believe it's in the vision statement.
The vision, there is beginning.
I believe so.
I don't know if it was pulled out of that.
Because you had a lot of discussion about what New England architecture meant,
Right.
and it like meant something different to every one of you.
And when I watched the video,
So I
it said,
think-
we'll come back to that.
So I think that's
don't think
why,
we ever did.
you know, it was pulled out.
Maybe, I mean, the visual preference survey, if really a lot of people feel like New England style is what they want, that should come out in data.
okay,
Yeah.
Okay,
So maybe that deals
Okay.
with that,
okay.
okay.
but I agree that existing community character, what is that exactly? Don't we wanna improve
Are we
the
trying to
downtown,
improve
not-
that? Yes.
Right,
We aspire to be higher, right? So,
right.
All right, so where is, so in number one,
Who's gonna be number one there?
okay,
I
yeah,
thought we were gonna
no, no, I'm
change
saying
ongoing
LU
to
3
periodic.
one,
Periodically.
right, we're changing to periodic,
Mhm.
okay.
Yep.
All right, so as amended, people feel good about that? All right, real quick, anybody in the audience have any questions?
You said-
Mark?
I've got a question. First, I like chapter 61 there. I feel, if, you know, looking at Bartlett Street, I guess everybody here probably knows about Bartlett Street. How there's, all these trees get cut just east of the FedEx big warehouse on that
Mhm.
side. And would that have been applicable to what took place there? Do you think the person who struck down all those trees, do they know about chapter 61? And can we still apply it to them? 'Cause are they gonna already make plans to build on it, or are they not gonna make plans? What are they planning, do you know, what they're gonna do with that land?
All right, I mean, I don't know, I mean, it's, all I know is it's undeveloped industrial land, I don't know whether
Right,
it would
it's
fit
been-
into
I mean,
chapter 61.
Yeah, they wouldn't have had, you know, they weren't, the landowners, I mean, it's industrial property, so they wouldn't have been interested in a tax break, nor would we be interested in giving a tax break to an industrial property owner. All this, chapter 61 is about tax breaks, if
Mhm.
you are in active agriculture or horticulture and, recreation.
Forestry.
Right.
Forestry.
And then what's happening out on Bartlett Street is, it went through, you know, all the boards, through the whole review process. And there's two, industrial, warehouses that are being constructed. And, I think between the two of them, it's almost 600,000 square feet of development.
So, but is it gonna be a new warehouse being built where those trees are chopped? Is it
Yes, yep, that site, there'll be two new, buildings.
2 new buildings? Oh my God. Now, one across the street, has that been occupied yet?
I believe they've leased it, or at least have leased part of it.
All right,
Do we have any?
okay, excuse me one second, Mark, go ahead, Ashley?
Just going to your point, we did it the last time, one of the last meetings in LU 33, he added buffer zones, and I remember we had some kind of discussion around buffer zones and industrial development, and I wonder if those exist in the current design guidelines, so we just struck all of those kind of descriptions under the guidelines for commercial and industrial, but do we wanna put that in?
Well, buffer zone has nothing to do with the guidelines, it has to do with, your zoning. So it's your setbacks with your zoning and stuff like that, that currently exist.
So in the design standards, in the site plan section that Michelle's talking about,
Yeah.
that's where there's a whole, couple pages on buffer zones.
So
And the
you-
width of them and what needs to be done in between, if it's industrial to industrial, industrial to commercial, commercial to residential, commercial to commercial.
So that already exists.
Yeah, it exists in your zoning, so your zoning might say you have a 25-foot buffer zone. What we do is we might say within that 25-foot buffer zone, are you gonna landscape it, make a walking path, what are you gonna do with it? That's what our job would be able to do on the side of,
So
the design
potentially you
side.
could have said, we'd like you to keep the trees, but like you said, you can't enforce the.
Well, no, when they come to the design review committee, just to let you know, they come with a blank slate in the beginning.
Okay.
We don't ask them to do any drawings or anything, we tell them not to, but some of them do, right? And then we say we either like or dislike. And usually the second meeting, they come back with something that's a little more concrete, where we might say, we want you to keep all this forest in here, don't cut it down, don't do a clear cut or whatever,
Okay.
right? Or making walking trails or something like that.
Yeah.
And then they fine tune it more in the third time. Some applicants take 6 and 7 times, some can do it in 3 or 4 times. But in the first meeting, they have a vision, and we tell them whether we like it or not, and then, before they put pen to paper and spend all the money on architectural renderings, we, Tom, myself, and the committee sort of tell them, guide them on, with these guidelines that we're talking about now, how we'd like to see things.
Okay.
Thank you,
You know.
Michelle.
And do you feel like there's enough beef in there to kinda keep a good visual buffer with trees?
It is, I mean, he's building huge warehouses, that's why you have to do these clear
Yeah.
cuts,
Okay.
you know?
Yeah.
It's all that part of that, what that whole part of Northborough is looking at right now and turning into, which is, basically these shipping places that,
It is, right, that's it's zoned for, it's zoned for industrial.
There's that
All right.
balance.
Okay, all right, so, we've gone now through there's 3 recommendations for land use goal number 3.
I just wanna check one thing, and it might not be here, but maybe somebody remembers, just 'cause things are coming out now, there was one goal, and I don't know if it was here or under economic development, where we talked about Business West and making sure, trying to bring everything into zoning, because there are some industrial uses there. And we talked about reevaluating them, and then we changed it, so we included all of them. And I just don't want this to be the one we cut out. I don't know where that is, because it keeps changing. But there was one goal we had that talked about evaluating uses in the different districts. and-
All right, well, we're not taking anything out other than the right to farm. And
Okay.
rewording number 3 to remove, develop and change it to perform periodic review of the town-wide guidelines for commercial and industrial development. So there's nothing here that's that specific.
Right, I just didn't know if, and the buffer zones in relation to adjacent uses was what it changed to when we changed the other one. But maybe,
I don't remember what you're talking about.
but maybe that was under economic development.
I think it might have been, I remember that.
I just don't wanna
conversation, too.
delete it wherever it went.
Okay, well, when we get to economic development, if it's not already there, we'll add it.
Okay.
Okay. All right, so we can move along on,
Disappeared.
there's no further discussion by the committee on the 4 recommendations for land use goal number 3. Do I have a motion?
3.
Took one out.
Oh, I'm sorry, 3.
Yep,
We adopted as amended the 3 recommendations for LU3.
second.
Thank you, John and Rick. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor? Okay, that's everyone. All right, thank you. Okay, land use number 4, goal, continue to support and manage commercial development outside the downtown, particularly along Route 20 and Route 9, considering adjacent land use compatibility and the town's preservation priorities. I figured I'd save you some words. Okay.
Action number 1, coordinate land use planning with regional transportation and investments.
Investments?
Yeah.
What does that mean?
I don't know.
We always have that in there?
Okay, Donnie, they want to know, what does it mean?
what does, so regional transportation investments, anything that Mass DOT invests in terms of, you know, their statewide roadway network and infrastructure, just coordinating with that and, as well as with other towns and their infrastructure investments.
We bring the trolley back?
Of course.
So-
Okay.
so-
We're making that a bike path,
All right,
or multi-use bike path.
all right. Dave, did you have a question?
Nope.
Okay, sorry.
I just didn't know if Mass DOT should be in there.
Probably not.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm trying to give you something tangible. Some communities, Marlborough did this, on the east side of Route 20, they did a focused corridor study to understand the build-out capacity, the transportation traffic work in there, and how they can modify parts of that road to go from like 4 lanes down to 3 lanes, the benefits for turning movements, traffic signals, that facilitated additional growth in that corridor, where they led to actually updating their zoning to realize that growth in that corridor for some of those capacity analyses too. So I can imagine this area with transportation studies that could lead towards land use goals and just coordinating your goals with the state. I mean, that's an example.
Okay, all right, thank you, Jeff.
Clearly, this wasn't done on Route 20 and Route 135.
No, it talks about different parts of Route
That's probably why
20.
this is in here, to try to get you ahead. Not
Right.
taking the court for the
Okay.
court.
Thank you.
All right, any other concerns about that one? Okay, number 2?
Consider updating and expanding existing highway business zone overlay district for Route 20 and Route 9 and tie it to the development and codification of design standards and guidelines mentioned in land use goal number 3.
All right, well, why don't you read 3 with it so we can,
Yeah. Yes.
3 was when we just changed to a periodic review of townwide guidelines for commercial and industrial development or by public design.
no, LU3, oh,
You're 4, you're in LU4.
right, but when it's it's referencing the guidelines mentioned in LU3, are they talking about goal LU3?
No, LU31.
I think
Well, I
it's the
mean,
goal, not the action.
Yeah, well, so then it would be LU,
3-1 and 3.
right. I mean, you have to change that to reference exactly what you're referring to.
Yes.
And it's not highway business zone, it's major commercial overlay district.
Okay, that's what I was looking. So it's not considered highway business zone, it's what?
It's called, the zoning that exists, the bylaw that exists today, out at, for the Northborough crossing and, you know, that whole area, it's called the major commercial
Overlay.
major commercial development overlay. I'll get the right word, the right wording.
Okay.
But,
So, all right, so we actually want to consider updating and expanding that?
well, I think that,
Okay, that's what this recommendation is saying.
Do we
that-
only have one, Kathy? I mean, is
well,
Route
the overlay district, was originally, developed in the zoning bylaw to use out in that area because it's zoned industrial.
9 and
and-
20 you're talking?
Right.
Is that our
And-
only one? All I'm saying is if it's not the only one, we shouldn't be specific to 9 and 20.
I think this is.
It's the only one like that.
Okay.
Yeah, it's from like Route 9 all the way down to where like,
Okay.
where the Davis cutoff is, right? That whole.
It's our only one.
Yeah,
So-
I have my bag tonight.
All right, I'm gonna try to ask us to do just like one person at a
Sorry.
time. No, you were fine, but I wasn't sure. Okay, so,
Major commercial overlay district.
Got it, nailed
so
it.
consider updating and expanding the existing major commercial overlay district for design
Can we
standards
stop right there?
and not have the codifications of design standards? I think we, well,
Well, it's tied to
They already
LU3.
need to use the design standards that exist for that type of development.
Right, there are existing design standards for both commercial districts and industrial districts.
but if we did periodically review them and want to change them, we would want them to apply to this. Right, and that's what 3.1 and 3.3 are saying, that
So
we're gonna
leave
do
it 'cause it's
period.
tied together?
Do people feel comfortable leaving it tied to the periodic review, or just the one and done?
Well, I think the bigger question here, when I think through
this seems to indicate that we'd like to make this overlay district bigger.
Mm.
We specified a particular geography for this sort of thing to allow Northborough Crossing to be built. But how far beyond Northborough Crossing does that district go today, Ken?
It just applies to that industrial district.
That footprint? I mean,
Which is,
Just Northborough Crossing?
yeah, yes.
Sand and gravel pit in there?
The sand and gravel.
Yeah, and the
think-
land that.
I don't
I
consider
think
that
that's
like
still
expansion.
industrial. The- I think the
I
gravel
think,
pit
I
is
think
still
the
industrial.
overlay district goes beyond the current developed Northborough Crossing.
Yeah, because I think it
Yes.
does go, I think it would include the gravel pit.
Okay.
And you have, one of the, well, it already exists today, because one of the things you need, or eventually we'll be thinking about is, will the baseball field stay there forever? That's a lot of valuable land.
Right.
That owner, may decide, he's out of the baseball business.
Okay.
So, how do you wanna see that develop? So that major commercial overlay district would, today would apply to that, because that's zoned industrial.
But would
Okay.
it apply to the Route 9 area that you had talked about? If we got sewer down there, we
Well,
want it to potentially be commercial?
Not right now, it doesn't
Yeah, so
today.
maybe this was talked, I feel like that's what this.
Yeah, I think that's what the.
Yeah.
So expanding
this-
it down Route 9?
Exactly, expanding down Route 9, and then, potentially expanding down, or, not into the center of town.
Right, but down 20.
Along,
Right.
along what everyone calls the southwest cutoff.
Right.
Okay, as
Right.
opposed to through downtown.
Right,
Okay.
and I think the key word here is particularly, right? So it's not saying this is the only area, right? That's a key area we want to look at. So to me, I think that's why we broadened this. It was, again, looking at, this kind of came out of the whole downtown discussion in a way too, right? It's like, wait a minute, we've got multiple commercial areas, we want to be thinking about them more broadly. I think that's what I recollect anyways.
And
but-
I think what we should do is we should put a period after Route 9. I think it's implied that whatever we do will be tied to development standards and guidelines. But
Do you need particularly, if it's
The thought of this number 2 is to think about an expansion of that major commercial overlay district.
Right.
Okay, so the suggestion on the table at the moment is to put a period after the 9 and remove the reference to the previous goal?
I wouldn't even put
Okay.
a period after district, but that's me. I just don't want it to imply that we wanna expand it to all of Route 20.
You
Well,
could
the
say the
southwest
southwest corridor.
Southwest cutoff, right?
So you could give it a direction,
Mhm.
do you know what I mean?
Okay, yeah, because the southwest cutoff, we're not talking about Main Street.
Right, yeah.
Okay, all right. So clarify what we mean by Route 20 to be just the southwest cutoff.
But that doesn't include expansion down Route 9 away from the south.
No,
And.
and Route 9, and Route 9. Instead of just saying Route 20, have Route 20 be defined as the southwest cutoff
Oh, and Route 9.
and Route 9, and then still have the period after 9.
Well, that's highway business and business south. You have 3 zones right at that,
The
right
southwest,
here.
right?
So you want to include all those 3 parcels, those 3 zones.
When you consider.
We want to consider including them, yes.
I think the keyword's consider, you don't
Right.
have to, but you can look at it.
Okay,
so
so,
are we having a period after Route 9, and then are we deleting what's after? or
Yes.
just a-
Yes.
So we're not tying it to LU 3-1 anymore?
Correct.
I think it's
It's
just
implied.
implied.
Oh, I'm fine with that. I
Okay.
thought that was good to begin with.
okay,
Yeah.
all right, okay.
I did like codification.
You like the
Use that
word?
somewhere, Yeah.
Trying to say something else.
Just rolls right off your tongue.
That's an SAT word. Yeah, we want to use that.
All right. Recommendation number 3.
88 words you have to know in 5th grade.
Understand development potential and articulate future infrastructure needs by reviewing water sewer capacity, particularly along Route 9 and Route 20.
Well,
That's wordy.
you can understand the development potential, but if it can't happen, I mean,
I would,
not sure.
I would restructure it so that was easy to read.
Yeah,
Yeah, the
New water
point,
sewer capacity along Route 9 and 20 to understand development potential. And future infrastructure needs.
right.
Just what I was.
How about review water sewer capacity, particularly on Route 920, to potentially increased development potential. And the whole idea of doing this is to give us a better ability to develop in that particular part of town.
Right. Okay, so what do you think, Donnie? Okay.
Sorry, I'm sorry.
Okay, review water sewer capacity, particularly along Route 20 and Route 9, to understand development potential and future infrastructure capability. Because we know the need, we need sewer. So that's close.
Well, I replace the word understand with.
Yeah, I don't like
enhance.
understand either.
Okay.
Well, it got crossed out.
Review water sewer capacity, particularly along Route 9 and Route 20, to enhance development potential, period.
Okay, all right, yeah, period, perfect. Perfect. Okay, good job. All right, number 4.
Can we, hold on a second?
Okay.
There's nothing in there that ties it to today versus the future. So you're just analyzing today's capacity to enhance development potential for today, or to study the full capacity at a future build-out? I just wanna make sure that idea didn't get lost.
Okay.
That's right, that's why future was in there.
Because there might be deficiencies today, and you're dealing with today. In addition to, there might be future build-out that we wanna further expand. I just wanna make sure that idea was clear.
Right,
Okay,
because we know what our,
capacity
I
now,
can tell you this second, but we know what our water and sewer capacity is today.
right,
You know, we know what our license is, you know, for what we receive from the MWRA and from, you know, what we put into the, you know, the joint treatment plant. And we know today, but
To
Did you
enhance,
say for future growth?
something
Something,
like that.
yeah.
I just wanna make sure it was clear that that's,
enhance development potential.
Another way to say it, that could be is, consider increasing water sewer capacity along Route 9 and Route 20 to, enhance development potential.
Right, okay,
implies a growth somewhere in there, or.
yes,
Yeah, it's considered too, right?
right. John?
Yeah, no, the only thing I'm wondering about, because I thought in the discussion we had a while back about this, like, whatever that plaza's called where Lowe's is, it, you know, because you guys got into a discussion here just a moment ago where you're talking about Southwest Cutoff, but, you know, that's another area that could get developed in some other way in the future as well. Is that covered here? Somebody buys that plaza and decides to do something with it.
You mean Tommy Lowe's old place, or are you talking
No.
about where he is now?
Northborough Shopping
No,
Center.
the Northborough Shopping Plaza.
Oh, I thought you
Where
said Lowe's.
No, where Ace Hardware and all
Oh.
those stores
Well,
are.
that-
So-
Oh, yeah,
Yeah,
okay,
I mean,
all right.
Yeah.
okay.
But that would not be a major commercial overlay district, that's already
Because it's
zoned for
west.
business or commercial.
Yeah, I think, I mean, there's some new development across the street there that's pretty nice, and it's still fairly close to some residential. I feel like that should be separate from the
Yeah.
Okay,
big enhancements that might
okay,
attract
just
big.
continue to support managed commercial development outside of downtown, particularly along Route 20 and Route 9. I don't know, I just trying to understand what's under this umbrella. And if it's just that overlay district, then, and the redefinition of that overlay district, then, you know, particularly along the intersection of Route 20 and Route 9,
No, it's not.
No.
It's more.
so,
You know,
that's all,
identify
I'm struggling a little bit with what.
That's right, the goal is more than just the Route 9, Route 20
It's-
intersection,
looks
but
pretty
there are no,
broad to me.
right, there's no recommendations to address commercial development, managed commercial development anywhere else. And we're saying particularly, but we're not
Again, I think
excluding.
that's that
I
discussion
think,
we're
I
having.
think that's where the greatest potential to do something is, I mean, it's conceivable there could be some redevelopment along West Main Street before you get to the Southwest Cutoff, but the real area of potential for the town is heading down the Southwest Cutoff and on Route 9, so I think we're trying to focus that within this.
Mhm.
So even though it doesn't talk about West Main Street and the shopping center where Lowe's Market is
Right.
specifically,
Right,
the idea is that the real potential for growth and commercial development on that side of town
just down in southwest coast.
Yeah, and I get that. I'm just, again, let's just say that.
Yeah, do you wanna
I
add
think
that
this-
same southwest cutoff in parentheses to this action item, recommendation? So that we know that's what we're talking about, is that?
You say, instead of saying Route 9 or Route 20, just say Route 9 in the southwest coast.
It was, then we take it out.
In the one above it, consider.
Now it's in 2 and 3.
There's no.
And I guess that's what the particularly is
Right.
that, you know, it could be something on West Main
Southwest
someday, but what we're particularly focused on is,
Well,
right,
that
I get
area,
it,
West
okay.
Main already has water and sewer, so we don't have to worry about that.
Right.
This is out where it's just not,
No, I do
Yeah.
appreciate that. Again, I'm looking at the goal,
oh,
and
Well,
so
water and sewer are two different things.
water sewer is not even mentioned there. It's really just
I
talking
thought you
about
were on 4.3.
development, so anyways.
We
Right,
have water
yeah.
capacity, we don't have sewer capacity.
Maybe a
Well, I
sewer
guess the other way
provides-
to handle that, if we really want to focus this particular item on the southwest cutoff of Route 9, even though we approved the goal already, is to change the wording of the goal to say along the southwest cutoff of Route 9.
I was trying to stay away from that, but
Oh,
I think we can, it's not really.
But if we don't want to do, we don't have to, but I think the intention here
Right.
was to focus a review of what we could do. at that particular step in time.
Well, it's not changing the intent, because the intent always was the southwest cutoff. So does anyone have any real heartburn over changing a goal that was already voted on just from a wordsmithing standpoint? We're not changing the intent, we're just adding southwest cutoff to the goal so that it matches the recommendations.
No objection.
Okay, does anyone? All right, hearing no objections, all right? Again, it's not, it's actually clearing up our intent. Okay. All right, number 4, Donnie,
Investigate a hazardous waste facility bylaw.
I'm not even sure,
I don't know where that.
I don't
I've
know
never
where that
seen
came from.
They came from me.
Okay.
Because, we talked about the planning board, and I think it said it had to talk about it and go from the master plan. You know what it is, it's by state regulation, hazardous waste facilities can go in industrial, like there's no, but if you wanna protect your town a little more, you have to have a hazardous waste facility bylaw. And I started talking about the planning board, and they said bring it in front of the master plan.
Is that
Okay,
at this
so-
level or local level, do you think?
Well, I mean, so,
It's
I
very
think,
specific, that's all.
I mean, I don't think just to answer that question, I don't think for the planning board to, you know, investigate any bylaw, that it has to be noted in the master plan. You know, I mean, I don't know that it even necessarily fits in this particular one, but, I mean, I know that there was discussion at a prior meeting about adding it somewhere in the
All right.
master plan.
well, the investigating of a bylaw would be the responsibility of the planning board to investigate and develop it if we want it. If we want it, I think what Amy's saying, it needs to say so in the master plan that we would, we wanna consider developing, you know, or consider protecting the town by developing a hazardous waste site or facility. We would have to then have a bylaw that says where it could go, right? That's what we're trying to get at.
And I think maybe it makes more sense in LU3 as LU4, now that we're sort of focusing LU4 just on the southwest cutoff, but this could go, you know, this could happen
This could be anywhere.
So LU3 talks about
Yeah.
future land
Right.
use to support its vision, establish character, and hazardous waste is something that, you
Okay.
know, so I'd move LU44 up to, make it LU34, put it up there.
Okay, but do people like where it says investigate a bylaw, or to make the master plan more about the need? The bylaw is how we get,
Yeah, what is the goal? What is the goal, Amy?
The goal is regulation of that kind of use.
Right.
Right, so
And I
what
think
is the
that makes
best way to
sense.
say that?
well, maybe develop regulations of hazardous waste facilities.
Do we wanna say why though, like,
so isn't it,
It's for protection, it's more
Yeah.
protection
But-
for our town,
Right.
because Shrewsbury and Hudson have them, we don't have them. And
So-
there are places in town where we do have hazardous waste.
yeah, I think you wanna,
So-
I wanna specify intent, because otherwise, it's like, oh,
We want it, yeah.
We want a hazardous waste facility.
Right,
Yes,
Okay.
we do. It'll add to the vision and establish community care.
All right, Michelle,
Certainly do that.
1 second, what, you got,
My
Michelle?
understanding is that there's there's nothing in zoning about hazardous waste facility in Northborough, right?
Right.
It's silent.
Correct.
Silent
Your
means that it's
groundwater
not an
bylaw
allowed
pretty much
use.
But
takes
it
care
doesn't
of it.
matter
Say that
with
again,
hazardous
Michelle?
waste, cause it's overridden by the state. So I read all the rules on it, and it says if you wanna regulate, you have to have something about it.
Well,
So if you,
Hazardous waste
if your
is different.
bylaw is silent, it's not an allowed use. If you put it in your, like, for example, we have nothing in our bylaws zoning for solar. It's not allowed use other than the panels you put on your house, right? It's silent, it's not
Well,
allowed use.
unless the state law
That's
makes
what
a
I'm
special
saying, does
provision
it-
as it
yeah.
did for recreational
I'm
marijuana.
sure
Yeah.
that's
Yeah,
true,
might-
because
yeah.
no
So,
town would
yeah.
purposely
So-
advocate for a hazardous waste facility to come in.
State law, bylaw
Right.
overrides it unless you add something. You still can't ban it, but you can regulate where it goes.
right, it's just like adult
Okay.
use,
Right.
right, I mean, that's
So
why
if
it's out of Route
is
9.
it like an adult use thing, Kathy, is it?
I don't know enough about it to, I don't,
All right,
it really would be, as I had said before to the planning board, it really would be a Board of Health, issue that, you know, that they would need to investigate. When I did just my initial investigation, when the planning board was talking about bringing something to town meeting in 2019, 2019.
okay, all right, so
So can I just-
instead of investigate a hazardous waste facility bylaw, all right, Michelle, what are your
All I'm
recommendations?
saying is, if it's silent, then it's not an allowed use, but if it's like those other things where we said, like the medical marijuana, or, you know,
This
Adult.
would be like
Yeah.
marijuana though.
so if it is like that, then of course you wanna have something in there to protect yourself. If it's not, I just don't wanna have a hazardous waste facility if we don't have to have it.
Right.
So
Right.
I'd like to hear from either legal counsel or something about the state law. Does it
For-
mean?
for-
Okay, so does it belong in the master plan, or are we tying our hands to something that we may be sorry,
For-
and just take it out
For
completely?
purposes here, can we just wordsmith something that,
Protect the town
that
from-
calls attention to it and
Yeah.
some intent to further investigate,
Okay.
you
Developing
know,
regulations for hazardous waste facilities.
something like that, yes.
Right.
Protect the
Yeah.
town from
Put that up,
improper.
put that up.
Consider developing regulations,
Consider developing regulations for hazardous waste facilities.
or hazardous waste facilities,
Placement of,
waste facility,
I would say to prevent, to protect the town from improper siting,
okay,
or something like that,
all right.
you know?
I don't really think
Improper
you need to
siting.
say that.
I think that it even is almost becoming too specific, that
Yeah.
by saying that, there's
know why you
half a
want it.
dozen other things that we've left out and not cited
Right.
specifically, so.
Right,
The whole idea is, this was a thought that came up during our talks, this used to be before, we don't wanna lose it.
Yeah.
all right, so why don't we just stop at town to protect the town?
Sure.
You don't even need that much. Why are
Well,
you doing it? Obviously to
intent-
protect the town.
The intent will be lost.
Right,
We
I don't know,
say.
but for dopes like me, George,
What
I
other
think you do
intent
need
would
to
there
say
be?
that.
well,
I
if
think you
I'm
need to
in
say
the
why.
hazardous waste business, I might think this is my opportunity now
We
to
just
find a
had
place
some
to put
controversy
it.
around it
Right.
in town
Yeah.
recently.
Yes.
So-
Right, okay, so consider developing regulations for a hazardous waste facility to protect the town. I mean, again, this is just a guide
It's not a hazardous waste facility, it's for hazardous waste facilities.
for hazardous, oh, take out the A. Oh, okay, I can't see the A. All right, and to everybody, so we did move,
Someday.
we moved it up to, number 3. Okay, all right, so now let's go into what used to be 5, but is now back to 4.
Yes. Enhance the cohesive appearance of the town's commercial areas through standard and consistent signage regulation.
But you do have consistent, and standard guidelines that regulate size and height and lighting.
Mhm.
This seems to imply they want more than what we have.
We do talk about this in another section.
81-3.
Yeah, so, and we really talk about trying to get a cohesive feel with the signage downtown, so do we need to take it beyond the downtown? Do we need cohesive appearance elsewhere?
Well, we're already have that. I mean, we just passed the town
Right.
meeting, a bylaw for the lit ones, not only allowed in certain areas, so we already have, we're regulating where, you know, outside lit ones can be, inside lit ones can be.
Yeah, so I
So-
think that this is a need.
All right, does anybody feel the need for, or remember why it was in there, or,
it was newly added because it's blue on mine, but if you look at ED 1-3, it talks about inside signage too.
What one?
ED 1-3.
Yeah, that's about downtown, but
Right.
I think, sure, that makes sense to have an above.
Right.
But you get the signage
Oh,
through when you
okay,
get new
different.
development, so I don't understand why you need to, I mean, you're trying to take existing signage and change it?
Yep.
Or you just, oh, that's not good.
Can't, it's grandfather.
Vote that right out.
Good luck,
Okay.
yes.
All right, just by show of hands, do you want to take this out?
Yes.
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 Okay, well, that wasn't hands, that was yeses, but, okay, same thing. All right, so we're gonna take this formerly known as 4, change the 5 back to 4 out. Okay, so we have 3 recommendations for land use number 4. We moved 1 up to land use number 3. Everybody okay with that?
Yes.
Okay, real quick, anyone out there in the audience have any questions or concerns about this area? Okay.
So we're
All
gonna
right.
vote on LU3 and LU4 then?
Yep,
I'm
okay.
gonna move that we adopt 3 recommendations in LU4 as amended and move the hazardous waste recommendation to LU3.
Okay.
Second.
Okay.
Who did the second, I'm sorry?
Jason. Okay, all right. Is everybody on the same page? Okay, all those in favor? All right, that's everyone. Yes? Okay, all right. All right, so that's land use. All right, so we do have, okay, just want to look, it's 8:30. Do we want to knock, I mean, I feel like I don't think we'll get through all of them, but so I'm gonna leave natural, cultural to the last because there may be Alex and Norm will be here. So, do we want to just start tackling housing?
Yes.
Okay, all right, housing number 1. First goal, to continue to maintain and encourage a diversity of housing options, to increase housing affordability and choice for all ages, and to ensure that at least 10% of the town's housing inventory continues to be deemed affordable under state guidelines. Donnie?
Action number 1 under this goal, explore residential uses, including affordable housing and affordable senior housing, as a potential future use for previously developed parcels that have the opportunity for redevelopment as they become available. Evaluate the Lightfoot site, the Westboro State Hospital property, in Northborough, of course, and the Boundary Street property as potential sites for housing development.
That was the other one that got a really bad rap,
Yes.
to your point.
Boundaries.
Developing, whether we were talking about developing it or leaving it, it seemed to nobody, like, it got a lot of bad press.
Specifically the Boundary Street property.
Yes.
Drop it off
Okay, one
after
second,
available?
go ahead. I'm sorry. I just wanted to, that was just to John's point earlier, that we said that there was a few that were outliers, that the survey gave the impression that people were not into it. Boundary was the other one.
Yeah, but I thought vacant and underutilized properties was, on the charts with a bullet, that was something that people, but you felt like it specifically, they didn't want those to be developed for housing?
The Boundary Street property, the survey, I believe, the emphasis was
I'll
against
look at it.
developing it.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that second sentence doesn't really need to be in
No,
there.
I agree.
I agree.
You gotta wait for the interest, because what if those 3 get developed?
Okay,
Maybe
so,
3 more.
all right, so because, just make sure, we're taking out from evaluate
Right.
on.
Right.
Okay. All right, thank you.
So, are we,
All right,
are we,
one second.
are we using the term affordable housing and housing affordability
It-
synonymously?
No, it's different. When we're talking about state affordability, that's
That's a
the
calculated,
amount based on the median income and housing prices in the area.
okay,
That's what we refer to as uppercase A, right? Then
That's
there's affordability, which is more, what can I afford?
yep,
Okay.
yep.
Affordability, that's the whole question of, has come up from a lot of the senior people in town about how can we make housing more
I-
affordable to us, which
Right.
has nothing to do with meeting
Nope,
state guidelines.
I've been
It's
sitting
something
here
we
for a
have to
year,
figure out
but it,
as a
Right.
town.
Right.
And I believe the only reference to the state guidelines is in the goal, to ensure that at least 10% of the
Yes.
inventory is deemed affordable under state guidelines. Everything else is in lowercase a.
Okay. All right, so on recommendation number 1, we're striking from evaluate on. Number 2, Donnie.
Develop and adopt an inclusionary housing bylaw, which would require a portion of housing units in specified developments be set aside for low and moderate income households.
I think that's, I think it should instead say explore the
Do-
inclusionary housing, cause Kathy had said that we used to have one and it didn't work, and there's been some studies that have shown that it's more, helpful to developers, and it actually, it may burden taxpayers, so
Okay.
I think exploring.
Instead of develop?
Instead of locking into it, say we'll
Right.
look at it as a potential?
Yeah.
All right,
So just take develop and adopt out and put a value in.
And I
Value,
thought-
all right.
I thought this was a loser on the survey too, no? Yeah.
all right, so we're gonna
Evaluate.
evaluate.
I like explore better.
All right, we're gonna do explore, not evaluate.
Is that what you said, Ashley?
Yeah.
Right,
I like
okay.
explore.
Spin the wheel. What's the next
Okay,
word we
well,
haven't used?
Rick likes evaluate.
You wanna keep
can I-
using this, you wanna keep using the same word over and over again, keep explore.
Right, right.
Okay,
And I think you can end it at, bylaw, because
Yeah.
it's, you can't specify which developments, you're either
Okay.
gonna adopt the bylaw or you're not.
okay,
Alright,
okay,
And then, it's.
okay, that's
And
fine.
maybe it's because, you know, this is what I do, but I mean, the fact that it's for, you know, an income bracket, I mean, it's inherent, and that's why you
Yeah,
do it.
but I, this
Okay.
one though, I think for lay people reading.
Thank you.
To keep it in there.
Helpful to keep it in.
I call
Otherwise, they have no
dopes like
clue.
me.
what
Okay,
inclusionary
okay.
is.
Okay,
But if you wanna take out unspecified developments, we can do it.
Right.
okay, that makes, okay, so we're going to, we said explore an inclusionary housing bylaw, which would require a portion of housing
No,
units.
Just get rid of all of that.
Oh, I thought we were gonna, no,
Well,
we
we
want,
still
no,
need
we
to
wanna
explain.
leave, we wanna leave
What's an
something.
inclusionary housing bylaw?
Right,
I mean,
Right.
so.
so yes,
Layperson reading this.
okay,
housing
so
units.
explore an exclusionary housing bylaw, which would require a portion of housing units be set aside for low and moderate income households. We don't have, I mean, we're saying we don't wanna say specified developments,
Right.
because we can't,
Inclusionary housing bylaw would require a
It's a-
portion of
I
housing
mean, once,
units
you know,
set
you,
aside
you
for low-
adopt it, and, you know, if a developer meets it,
he has to do it,
that, yeah.
right?
I mean, that's my understanding. I mean, yeah, you can't pick and choose, you can't say, you know, we want it in this neighborhood, but we don't want it in this neighborhood.
Right.
But that, I guess, that is, for the person that, to John's point, who's reading this, we're gonna explore an inclusionary housing bylaw, which would require some amount of housing units somewhere in town to be set aside. I mean, I guess I don't need, if I'm just a layperson, I don't need to know that it's for every development. The developers need to know that. Oh, I guess it
Still
does,
doesn't-
because if I say not in my backyard, I have to be told too bad.
Yeah, it still doesn't tell me what it is, like what, how does the developer qualify for that?
Well, I think,
Well, it's like a bylaw that you write, and you say the threshold is if you're gonna build 4 more units, when you get to hit 4, 1 is affordable, the other 3 are market rate. That's your bylaw. That's about the only way the town is gonna get affordable housing. You
But
really,
Kathy said in the past it didn't work for whatever reason.
Well, I mean, we didn't have a big enough, density bonus in our existing bylaw.
Okay.
I mean, in the,
I think the time is,
yeah, it was very different.
All right, so
Inclusionary
somebody,
comes with a density bonus too?
Excuse me?
Inclusionary also has a density
Oh,
bonus?
it has to be, yeah, I mean, that's what it is. It's, you know, you get, the applicant gets a density bonus, and in turn, the town gets an affordable unit.
all right, so can I just say, how about this? We're gonna have definition somewhere? Is the definition for inclusionary housing somewhere in our definitions?
It should be, I could.
Okay, so then we can do explore an exclusionary housing bylaw, and they can look in the index or
It's
the,
brutal.
So with an inclusionary housing bylaw, you don't get to choose where the density is located.
You want high.
No, it's in the development.
Yeah.
So wherever they choose to
Footnote
do a development, if they wanna
3.21.
kinda use that bylaw, they can make it a more dense development than others.
as long as they're going to make a percentage of it affordable.
Right, I mean,
Yeah.
that's what,
Uppercase,
that's what an inclusionary zoning bylaw is
Okay.
that you know, the town is getting something, but, you know, you don't get anything for free.
Yeah.
So, you know, the trade-off is that the developer gets a density bonus, and then, you know, when you figure out what that, you know, your bylaw determines what that
right,
density bonus
it gives you
is.
more control than a 40B.
So in a bylaw, like, sorry, another question, in a bylaw like that, can you say it's only applicable in certain areas, certain zones in town, or?
Yeah, you could, yeah, you could,
Yeah.
you could.
Because I just, when I was reading through this section today, I was just, what struck me was, there's a lot of talk about affordability, but no talk about where to properly cite it, and I feel like that's a piece that we're missing here.
Well,
It's talking
affordability
about-
is always gonna be more densely populated because it's smaller units on smaller pieces of property.
Right, so I
And
think.
that's why
we should-
downtown is one of those areas.
That's what I think,
Yeah.
I think downtown makes the most sense, but it's not
Well,
always
the-
explicit.
The thing we gotta keep in
Yeah.
mind is the two parts of affordability. One part is this 80% of the median income populated by lottery meeting state housing rules.
Mm-hmm.
That's what inclusionary zoning gives you, and that helps you get to and stay at 10%.
But it includes density bonus, so that's the only,
In that particular portion. But there's this other question in town about general affordability of housing for certain population segments. And it could be, once we get into this, depending on how you deal with developers and how you use funding sources, many areas in town could be appropriate for creating other kinds of affordable housing, which don't qualify for the 10%, but solve some of the problems we're facing in town with housing affordability. So my concern is, I don't want to start being restrictive at this point in where this housing could go. You know, that if we talk about affordability in both concepts, there could be some really good developments of smaller, affordable housing done in partnerships with developers that meet a need in town. And once we get into how to do it and where to do it, it could make sense to do it in some existing residential neighborhoods.
but the goal is, maintaining existing character of residential neighborhoods. And one thing that we heard leading up to this town meeting was, duplexes are interfering with the existing character, and maybe those missing middle type housing, which would sort of bridge the gap, like you're talking about, are maybe the housing types that don't fit as well in some of these neighborhoods and would fit well downtown. So I just wanna make sure that we're not.
Maybe I could help you to understand, like a past project was the over 55 community on Lincoln Street, right? And the developer says, I'm gonna sell all these at market rate, but there's some land downtown that I can build 4 houses on, denser together. So we got 4 units, 4 houses
So it
built.
doesn't have to be in
or-
the same development.
Right, exactly. So now let's say you get somewhere out on another section of town that has land where it's perfect for another little over 55. And they do the price points, over 55s, you get them for 500 or 600,000. They maybe don't wanna give 2 of those for 100,000. So then they buy some land and they say, we're gonna build them here. So it's not necessarily where you think the affordable will be, it may be in the denser areas.
Okay.
But you always want that option because the inclusionary zoning is the way that you're gonna get affordable housing
Okay.
from a developer through density. Right now, we have nothing to ask.
Right, and the other thing is, affordable doesn't necessarily mean duplexes. There are.
No, agreed.
You can look at, the 800 square foot ranches in the neighborhood that I live in are.
Much more affordable than the duplex next door.
That's right, and an inclusionary zoning, an inclusionary housing bylaw you would have to make the housing lot smaller. I mean, we're all grandfathered in because we were built before the half-acre lots, right? So we're all on a third or a quarter of an acre. Those are the things that you would get a developer interested. I mean, that's,
Yeah, and I'm not disagreeing that that's a good strategy, that density isn't a good strategy. I just wanna make sure that we're thinking about where they should go and making sure that things are fitting with existing community
Right.
character and.
That's a
and
question.
that's
In order for you to adopt that zoning bylaw, you would have to go through a town meeting process, right? And in that process, you develop it and you have to have some public input about what it is. So I think some of those unknowns that you're talking about right now would have to be defined during that process and approved by the town to answer some of those specific questions, right?
Because, remember, master plan is way up here, way
Yeah.
up here.
Right.
Yeah,
So then, just like with any of the goals, whether it's housing or open space or, economic development, recreation, housing, one of the recommendations I think is, starting back up the housing partnership, which is under a state program, a lot of communities have a housing partnership, we used to have one. So the goal, one of the recommendations is, so under the master plan, then, you look at putting together your housing partnership, Housing Partnership studies all of this. They work with the planning board and the zoning board of appeals, you know, developing a bylaw or several bylaws, whatever. And then, like Jeffrey said, then, you know, then you go through the public hearing process, you go to town meeting. So it eventually, you know, I mean, more and more people are gonna get involved as you potentially develop a bylaw. Or just same thing with open space, you know, we talk about, you know, yeah, we want open space and we gotta protect, you know,
Okay.
scenic views, but, you know, it's gonna be the open space committee, it's gonna be the trails committee, you know.
I just wanted to kind of bring it up just so that it's on people's minds, like the affordable housing that's behind the library, that's such a great place. There's accessibility, people can walk, things like that make sense downtown and places where, you know, I don't know, seniors can live and walk and do what they gotta do in the middle of a residential neighborhood that's spread out. It doesn't make as much sense. So I just, I'm sure, you know.
All right, so for housing, for recommendation number 2, I'd like to just hear some wording as to how we're going to explore an exclusionary housing bylaw.
Require a portion of housing units set aside for low and moderate income housing.
Okay, is everybody comfortable with that? Right, we're just taking out specified developments.
Yep, yes.
Okay, are people comfortable with that as one of the ways in which we're going to achieve that goal?
Yep.
All right, okay. So, recommendation number 3, Donnie.
Work with local housing partners to identify opportunities for them to develop and own affordable housing, which will allow the town to proactively guide affordable housing locations.
So we're housing partners, is that like Habitat?
It could be anything. I think that's why it's so general, I'm sorry.
Okay, so it could be developers, it could be,
It could be a for-profit developer, it could be a not-for-profit developer.
okay, all right,
Habitat became a.
okay. Any of the management companies that, okay, all right.
But those would have to come before the planning board too?
Everything has to,
Yeah.
nothing can be built and cited without getting planning board or zoning board approval, depending on.
So,
I mean,
'Cause I think one of the things
comprehensive
we're-
permits don't have to, but, that's not before the planning board.
There's one other thing I want to talk about when we're talking about affordable housing, just in front of master plan, because, you know, a lot of times when you talk to the seniors too, like, the taxes are a great issue, so inclusionary zoning, a lot of sounds good where it's senior housing, not just, because if you're out a lot of housing, you could be bringing up the taxes, which are hurting the seniors more than if you didn't do it. Well, the taxes impact, I mean, the affordability can impact property taxes. So if you're adding inclusionary zoning that's not senior housing,
Well, the inclusionary zoning would allow for some of the units to be affordable, therefore their tax rate is based on the market value of their home, which is locked in at that lower dollar amount.
right, but what about the rest of us, like the rest, I think
Well,
the
our
end
taxes
is-
don't go up because there's
Well, if you add
housing.
children to the school.
Well, that's different.
Yeah, I think
Well,
if it's not
possible.
senior housing, right, there's a chance for a lot more students in the school system, which is the highest cost to taxpayers in Northborough, which is the biggest cost to seniors in terms of taxes.
Right.
But, and I think what you're saying is you can do an inclusionary that's just for seniors.
Right, well, when you explore the bylaws, you can make you can make that recommendation and see how it flies, right?
If we call it affordable housing, does that fall under the state guidelines?
No, it's,
It does.
in this way, we're talking the lowercase a.
Just affordability.
Affordable alternatives, right, right.
Okay.
Because the state does not.
No, I don't want it to.
Right, the state doesn't, the state subsidizes the housing behind the library and over on Hudson Street, so that the people that live there pay a third of whatever their accountable income is their portion of the rent. That's very different than going into a development where one of the duplexes sells for 200,000 versus the 600,000. And that's different too, that over 55 communities are different.
I'm good with it, I
Okay,
just didn't know if it applied to it.
okay. All right, does anybody have anything as far as the wording on H13? Okay, all right, so we have three, all right, just three recommendations for housing number 1. Go ahead, yes, Henry?
Henry Scolani, speaking about this, just let me give you some figures when you think of
Okay, but,
seniors.
are they different than the ones you gave us last time, about the 80%?
Well, yes, there's
Okay.
if you recognize, in town, 22% of the people in town are over 60.
Mhm.
There's more people over 60 than under 20. The over 60 people, when you address their housing, they're less likely to have children for schools.
Mhm.
They typically will stay and shop in this area. They won't be changing jobs, like a lot of people come in town, they stay a few years and they move someplace else. 22% is a fairly large percentage of the demographics in town. So when you're addressing that, you have to keep that in mind. You know,
Yep.
and we pay taxes too, so.
Right. The population in Massachusetts is decreasing, but the age is increasing.
Yes.
Mark?
Yeah, I'll stand up, but I just wanna say something. What I'd like to say, we'll see H1-1. First of all, I just wanna say this, the Westboro State Hospital area, this goes along with my general overview. I think what would be nice we could do as a town, we identified the 5 most beautiful, most scenic places in our town. And I really believe that the Westboro State Hospital area, whatever part is in Northborough, that is one of the 5 most beautiful parts. So if we identify that and not put a housing unit there, because you get a nice meadow, you get a nice forest on each side, you've got a little Chauncey on one side, you can barely sit still, it's a beautiful view. Can we just not develop the most 5, let's identify the 5 most beautiful views. Now, I would have identified Bartlett Street as one of the 5 most beautiful views. It's too late. That's industrial area, and that's done. It's all the warehouses, and that, it's actually, they're not even nice-looking warehouses. But I like what we did, where 9 and 20 intersect with Wegmans, and that was great. Because that, even though it was forest, it really wasn't very beautiful. I never noticed it. It wasn't scenic. It wasn't worth looking at. It wasn't, so that worked out great. And it didn't go from a beautiful area to an eyesore. So can we just, I think what we should do is just, amongst all the things we're doing, find the 5 most, identify 5 beautiful areas in Northborough, and make sure they never built on either a housing unit, commercial, or anything. That's just my overview statement.
Okay, all right, I would hope that you can make our next meeting, because when we get to natural resources and the historical piece of it, you'll see that some of what we're recommending is to try to do that.
Yeah, okay.
So that'd be great,
Is
great,
that
thank you.
something that could be incorporated into the visual preference survey? Is it like, what are the most important views to
Right.
residents of?
Absolutely.
Most important views, yes.
Yep, okay, thank you. Okay, all right, Carrie, sorry.
Just quickly, in talking about inclusionary housing bylaw, there was something mentioned at the last, one of the CMRPC meetings, it was about a senior housing overlay district. So maybe if we're really focused on senior housing, that may be something to think about, if there's some sort of overlay district for seniors somehow. I'm not sure how it works or anything, but it was brought up at that meeting.
We used to have one.
Yeah.
Would it work out?
It was up
We
on
used
Mark,
to have
Mark Fidrich's property.
No, as far as a bylaw,
Tried to.
the town had, because there's certain ages that the federal government has said you can regulate for, and then you
Right.
don't, but,
Discriminate.
right, you're not discriminatory. So 55 is the magic number, so a lot of towns adopted, as did Northborough, what's called 55 and older bylaw. And so we had one, and then,
Oh, the candle factory.
right, and it has been used. And then the sort of housing market fell out for 55 and over. And, so the planning board, deleted it, went to town meeting, took it out of the zoning bylaw. But anyone, like any developer, I mean, even a subdivision, if, we don't have subdivisions really anymore because of not that much land left. But I mean, even if a developer wanted to do a standard subdivision, no density increases or anything, they can age restrict that. They can say, you know what, we're if they do 55 and old.
Age restriction and affordability have nothing to do with each other.
Right.
All of the age restricted developments we've done in Northborough have been priced for very wealthy people over the age of 55.
Right.
So just something to think about the overlay district, I don't know,
Yeah.
again, how it works.
Yeah,
just
and
to
it,
put
and
a
it may be
bookmark.
something that the planning board does want to take a look at again, based on the market and so forth.
And I wonder if you limit the number of bedrooms too, that would make it more affordable, more for seniors, like, I think the ones over in Candle Factory are 3 and 4 bedrooms, so.
No, Candle Factory were supposed to be 2-bedroom, and they actually have restrictions on their deeds, but they have a 3rd room that has a door and a closet that's a study.
That's
And
why
so-
I've seen them for sale.
Yes,
They're
right, and they
not-
advertise them as 3 bedrooms, even though they're not by deed restriction, because they can't sell them if they only advertise them as 2 bedrooms. It's
But if they were
a bane
too
of my
bad
existence.
cheaper, they probably could.
But they're not going to, right,
No,
so, yeah,
they're not,
yeah,
they're
so,
not gonna build them because
okay,
it's,
all
at
right,
least
so.
that's what we found there, it's not the mark, that.
All right, so
We
we
will
have
get
our three
financing for
recommendations for housing goal number 1. If there's no further discussion,
I move we adopt these three.
Oh,
goals
look, it's
for-
time to,
okay, all right, so Rick is recommending that we adopt them as amended.
Second.
John is
Do I
seconding.
need to do something over here for you?
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
All right, everybody agreed. All right, let's try to get through another housing, if people don't mind. It's 5:09, or do you want to call it a night?
No, we need to keep
Oh,
going.
okay.
Let's get through H2.
All right, let's get through housing. That's fine. I'm just figuring I'd ask.
Yeah.
Okay, housing goal number 2, promote housing types that accommodate future growth in the community while maintaining and enhancing the existing character of residential neighborhoods. Number 1, Donnie.
Okay, ensure that the town zoning bylaw supports the creation of certain types of ownership or rental housing developments that are inherently more affordable to seniors aging in place, first-time home buyers, and working professionals. Undertake a study to understand housing price points for home ownership and rentals that would reduce the cost burden experienced by town residents. Determine the types of housing that would meet these price points. Work collaboratively with developers to enable these housing types in targeted areas.
Okay.
So the thought process behind this is, we need to understand for our, especially for our senior population, what is the price point that's affordable? That's a question that we don't have the answer to right now. What the state says is you shouldn't spend more than 30% of your income on principal, interest, property tax, and insurance. And if you do, you're called housing cost burden. And so the whole thing around affordability is to produce housing that people can spend less than 30% of their income on those housing costs. Now, the question is to try and figure out, as best we can, what the median income is for people in our senior population in town. And you can work backwards to figure out what 30% of that is, and you can make an estimate of property taxes and insurance, and what that leaves is how much could someone afford to pay for principal and interest. You can then take that to come up with a value. So let's say when you do that, and I have no facts yet, but just let's say, for argument's sake, that when you do that math, the number is $250,000. That we should be providing housing units at $250,000. And that would be relatively affordable for our senior people. So now the question is, how do you build it? And that would be a job for the partnership or maybe our housing corporation to work with the developers, say, okay, what could we do? Is there available, for example, town-owned land? That we're interested enough in this that the town will donate to a builder so many acres of land to reduce the development cost on the project. So the developer can create X units of housing at a price point that we think people can really afford. Or maybe we use community preservation money to offset some of the cost. We know that the form factor of these units is gonna be smaller than typically what people are building today. And if we're talking about a senior population, they probably ought to be on one floor. And they probably ought to have less stairs and things like that. So there's a whole way this can be figured out, but the point of all of this is to do the work, to figure that out, and then to figure out how to fund it, and end up with a certain amount of housing in town, which really would be affordable for different populations, whether it's a senior population, first-time home buyers, town employees. There's a lot of ways to go about this. None of this would count on the state's, wouldn't count towards the 10%. But it would address the issue of how you create a certain amount of housing in town, which fits that.
The small A. Who would own this task in town?
Well, I think the housing partnership would start to think about that if the town was agreeable to try and do some work on this, the housing partnership would start to do some of the work, get involved with some of the housing agencies of the state, MHP and SHOP or people like that, and ask what other towns have done, and how do you determine what's affordable? And the other side of this is, once you build this housing, the people who go into it, if someday they pass away or they want to sell it, that can't become market rate housing when it's sold. So the people who go into this housing have to understand, they're limited.
It's not an equity build, yeah.
Right, that if they go out of it, it's gonna be, it's still affordable for the next people to come in. There's gonna be an administrative process around this.
We have a senior housing community though in Northborough.
What do you mean a senior housing community?
What's the name of the street? What's the name of the street that, we have a senior housing,
Summer Street.
Summer Street,
So
thank
we
you.
have two,
I suppose
two
there's,
Those are state
housing
That's what we're
subsidized.
talking about.
Oh, the
units
state subsidized, oh.
that's rental housing, and the people who are in there are making no more than 30% of median income.
which is what you're talking about.
No, I'm talking about,
This is small a, Dave.
this is small a, this is trying to understand what housing can be built for. This is home ownership rental. Everything you see in those units is rental housing, it's not home ownership, they don't own those things.
Correct.
They rent them and they have federal and state vouchers that pay for most of the cost. Everybody in those units pays a different amount, depending on what they can afford.
Correct.
Okay, what we're
That's
talking
where the
about
30%
here
comes in.
is actually home ownership units that I own on a 2-acre lot, a huge house, it's draining me out from property taxes. I wanna sell it, but I wanna stay in town and I wanna move to something smaller with a lower tax burden that's affordable to me.
And you don't have that.
We don't have that, and this is saying we need to figure out how to do that. How many of those units we can build and how we're gonna build them, what the rules are gonna be is undetermined. But if we do what's in here, we can start to make progress towards that goal.
And then the second piece is to look at this, ensure that the bylaws help promote that, whether it's smaller lots or setbacks and things like that, so that you can put more of.
High density,
Which
sorry.
is why we shouldn't be restricting right now in our zoning any particular type of housing formation, because it could be that at some point,
Yeah.
some of these things work in this situation where they truly are affordable, located in the right places. And if they're all prohibited, then after you've done all the work to get this all figured out, you can't build them because the zoning prohibits all of it. And I know the zoning's prohibiting it now because there's a different thought process behind why people don't like these smaller form factor types of housing. But done properly and cited properly and priced properly, they're very effective. And the last thing we need is not to be able to build them because the zoning has prohibited all those form factors, because what we wanna see in town is a lot of single-family homes on larger lots, because that's what we've always had. And there's a place for that. We don't want it, obviously, but we
If
need
I
to
might
keep the zoning
add a little-
reasonably flexible enough, so if we actually figure this out, we can build it someday.
Okay,
What I might
Jeffrey?
quickly add is, I've worked with many economic development firms over the years. And what they'll do is, it's called a market gap analysis. And what they'll do is they'll look at all of your different residential housing products, the types of housing in your town. They'll look at all of your buy power, your demographics, who would wanna move to your town here, and then identify the gap in your supply to see how you can marry the need of what some of people would wanna move into. So for example, seniors that wanna live in town and wanna have a certain type of housing product type, is there a gap in your town? They would define what the price points would be, what the size of those units, the amenities of those things, and they say, like, well, would there be someone that would build this? What would the building costs be, to see if you could actually build that product within your town through a study that would probably take 6 months to do, and maybe $20,000 to $30,000, where you'd understand the answers to what I think Rick is saying here. And then you'd realize if there's a gap, if it's not, and what it would take to do. And then the second part, as Fran was saying, is you go back to your zoning and say, like, well, they physically describe what it is. Can we build any of that stuff within our town? Maybe we're set, maybe we can, maybe we don't have the zoning tools to let us build that type of product in town, or not. Then the first step, I think, would be doing that type of study.
So does that market gap study take care of that bullet that's underneath it?
Yes.
Yeah, I would love to unpack this and
Yes.
consolidate it and put it into terms that you just said. That would make it a lot more digestible.
Yeah, well, I
And
think
I don't know even who working professionals are, every single person in
Yeah,
town needs a.
why is that in there?
So
I
yeah,
think
so
they're
I think
talking,
that
well,
would be good.
I think that, we're talking about the firefighters, the teachers, the municipal employees that have difficulty living in town because of
They
the
make
cost.
more than me. Right. I was a first time home buyer out of college. I don't know, I mean, that's fine, whatever.
I think, I get that, and what's typical in those studies, when we say we wanna go out and have someone do the study, they would say like, well, what's the gap you're trying to find? Is it high-end residential? Is it luxury housing? Is it like deeply subsidized housing? You're giving them a little bit of a bracketing of this idea, this workforce housing, or this, maybe senior population, that you're trying to find that part of the gap. So those words help them say what the types of things you're looking for.
All right,
Yeah, I
so,
think that would be very helpful to know really what the need is.
Right.
And then address that need.
okay, so in recommendation number 1, now that we've talked about it, let's have Donnie reread it and see whether or not, if it reflects what we're talking about, then let's not wordsmith it and feel that we have to, we're not paying per character.
I really think when we start though, instead of saying sure, you have to go back to explore or investigate it again, because.
Well, I think the study should come first.
Right, why don't we
Yeah.
just put the town to do a market gap study, and then it leads to all of this other results.
If I could.
Okay, go ahead, Jason.
I was looking at the bullet and thinking that almost looks like a recommendation in its own right. Or if not a recommendation itself, then it's probably decomposed into 3 bullets: do the study, determine the types of housing that would meet the price points, and work collaboratively. So, at least as a starting point, I think I would structure this a little differently. It seems like a lot of stuff packed into one recommendation.
Okay.
And I think there's a little subdivision there that could take place to make it a little more understandable.
All right, so you're saying that the indented paragraph should be its own recommendation?
What was the bullet item itself looked to me like it could be a standalone recommendation
Right.
as a starting point for
Yep.
what we.
Okay, and since they're not by priority, it can be after the one about the zoning bylaws.
I think Donnie just changed the order of it here.
Oh, okay, there you go, all right.
But, I mean, if the market gap analysis is really what that study is, then maybe we should say that, because that's helpful to know.
Yeah, the market gap, that's a pretty generic term too, so I actually think that the words that you have in here would relate to a market gap. It's identifying the specific things that you want to come out of that. So rather than saying, let's do a general study, these words actually try to be specific to what you're looking for in the study.
All right.
And partly, I think what John was saying before, it gives you a little context of, we're not looking for luxury housing, we're looking to achieve these types of things in that type of study. Just trying to be helpful.
Okay, all right, now how do people feel about, do we want to ensure that the bylaws support the creation of these types of things, or do we want to think about it?
I want to ensure, I want to ensure it.
I want to ensure it.
I just think it's not fair to the people who live here and that are paying taxes. Who's gonna fund this? Like, to the people who are like struggling to afford their first-time homes and like, they're just barely paying their taxes, now we're gonna afford to pay for all these other new houses?
We're not paying
Well,
for
if the
it.
town's gonna donate the money and then
No, that was one,
Land.
so the land, giving the land was one of the examples that Rick gave as to how you can reduce the overall cost to a developer to encourage him to make housing options that are less expensive because his margin of profit remains the same.
I would
So-
say though, if we don't know what the study or the analysis is gonna, come up with, we shouldn't jump already to,
Right.
we're putting zoning bylaws in place, so.
That study's very
So
important.
explore the zoning bylaws that would support the creation of these, because whatever comes out of that, then you need to be open-minded to see what we can do to change our zoning to kind of meet what it shows the need is.
But again,
So we could say something like,
so afraid.
we could change H2(1), especially if it's gonna come either as part of or after the study, just to say, review town zoning bylaws to see if they're consistent with outcome of study or something.
Right, yeah, review and update.
Consistent's a good word, yeah.
All right, does that make sense,
used it.
Donnie? Okay, so,
Keeping this.
yeah, so that number 1 is staying where it is. Number 2, instead of ensuring the town zoning bylaws, we're going to review the
Review town bylaws to
bylaws.
ensure consistency with output of the study, or results of study. Could be the bylaws are perfect the way they are.
To ensure consistency with the study in H2-1. Okay, all right, the next one, as Donnie's typing, Identify appropriate areas for missing middle housing to preserve and provide transitions from existing residential neighborhoods to the downtown and update zoning to accommodate such housing.
I would stop that right at housing.
Identify appropriate areas for missing middle housing,
Yeah.
because it's implied as to, that it's going to
No,
preserve.
wherever it is, doesn't have to be
Okay.
downtown, just wherever it ends up.
Yeah, cause it might be in downtown, it
Right,
might not be the
right.
transition from.
Could we replace missing middle with the definition of missing middle?
Okay, all right, well,
Right in the
wait, I just don't want to get, all right, so we're asking on number 3, to replace missing middle with actually what missing middle means.
What the type of housing that is.
Yeah, we have that in our definitions.
We do.
I would-
I'll just replace definition.
Okay, replace with the definition.
If you
And
were to put
then-
missing middle in parentheses after you put the definition, and you can do that.
And then the suggestion is that we stop it there, and we take out the rest of it.
I have one definition, wait, you have a definition, or you're gonna look into it?
Yeah,
Does
Yeah.
anybody-
Before we approve it, I'd like to see the definition.
Yeah, does anybody wanna hear what
Yep.
it is?
Yeah, it's a pretty, it's, oh, good. Do you have it,
I
actually?
have one, but I don't know if it's the one we're using.
Yeah, we,
Let Donnie read it off.
Is it in the website?
It is.
I mean, it's a, I mean, I know this doesn't help anyone right now, cause I don't have the words, but it's a standard, you know, I mean, it's there's like an industry standard
Right.
about what missing.
I
middle
have
All right,
is.
so while
It's
Jeff,
called
they
missing
want, they don't want to
middle.
vote on it without knowing what it means.
Do we
All right,
need
so,
it?
all right, so let's, all right, while
Define
Jeffrey's
definition.
looking to find out what the definition is, let's go on to the next one, so that we can get through this.
Build awareness around accessory housing units allowed by right or by special permit in the town's residential districts.
And is accessory housing units the same as accessory dwelling units?
Yeah.
Okay, so should we say accessory dwelling units?
Well, yeah, sure.
I mean,
if you
is-
wanna be consistent with what our zoning says today, yeah.
Okay.
I think housing is better for the layperson.
Do we need by right or by special
Yes.
permit? We just jump from
Well, we
housing
do-
units.
Okay, what is it?
Yeah, oh, actually, that's true, because, you know, and just end it there, because in our zoning bylaw, depending on what district you're in, it's either by right or by special permit.
Okay,
You know, it's already identified in the zoning.
What is the intent and goal of this, to try to have people provide additional units for family members instead of putting them out there?
Yeah, it's
Yes.
like an aging population now moving back with their families.
So trying to encourage people to do that, to allow more units for,
right,
But there's no restriction on it.
Right.
You could,
could be your,
you can build one and, you know, it's intended for your in-laws and
you just can't rent it out though, right? You think,
you can,
you
Because they
can,
can use them for like.
you can just build one in your, you know, on your own property and build it out. There's no limit to who can live there, there's no,
some communities do, some communities say it
It's
has to be
impossible.
family member. I mean, I'm not saying we should, I'm just saying some do require to be a family member. The only restriction is in its size, in relation to the main house,
it's very restrictive in size. And that's how you keep it as a,
an accessory unit.
right,
And also, it's affordable because it's small.
Right, okay, so build awareness around accessory housing units, people wanna leave housing or change it to dwelling? Doesn't matter to me.
I think it should be dwelling because it matches the zoning. We have accessory dwelling unit.
Okay, so,
I just don't, when lay people reading it, it's housing a clearer term to them as well.
right.
well,
Planning board
How is
knows
dwelling
that
different from
dwelling
housing?
means, but
Yeah.
All right.
somebody else in the street reads it, but housing would be better.
well, if we leave it lowercase, we can leave housing. Cause otherwise it's an
well, we're
ADU.
gonna be building awareness anyway, so they're gonna know.
All right, so if it doesn't matter, we'll just leave it the way it is, build awareness around accessory housing units, period. Donnie, did you get to, did we figure out middleman,
Sorry.
middle?
Sorry, I wasn't following exactly. Housing or dwelling?
Housing,
Housing.
we're gonna leave it
We are
housing,
keeping with
yeah,
this.
we are leaving housing. Have we found what missing middle means yet?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead, Jeffrey.
So it's a little wordy, obviously. Missing middle housing, medium density housing types such as cottage, cluster housing, and courtyard apartments that are in keeping with the character of existing single-family neighborhoods. These types provide diverse housing options along a spectrum of affordability to support walkable communities, locally serving retail, and public transportation options.
Sounds downtownish, yeah.
I like missing
Yeah.
middle better.
Okay, so will that definition, well, if we keep this as a recommendation, that definition will be in the master plan somewhere? All right, do people want to leave it then, with the missing middle?
Yeah, I like the definition.
Leave it as it is.
Guide,
Okay, so,
appropriate areas.
all right, so the definition will be, well, so the definition will be in the master plan. Do people want it actually written in this recommendation, or just use missing middle?
I think missing middle's fine if it's,
Yeah.
If the
the
definition
definition's
somewhere.
included with the
Okay.
Be
document.
referenced
All right.
I
by,
have a question, because we're doing a visual preference survey, like, wouldn't that, like, do we really need missing middle? Because we're gonna do a visual preference survey to decide what we want in downtown. What if it's not missing middle, we're supposed to follow the visual preference survey?
This is not just this is not just
anywhere.
downtown.
this is anywhere.
This is identify appropriate areas for it. It might not be downtown.
Right, but people wanted to keep their existing character in their neighborhood, so we're like.
Well,
going-
by definition, it talks about those types of housing within the, don't know how they do it, but within the character, I think is what.
Right,
Right.
but I know on
That's
the
what it's
planning
just
board, we've gone back and looked at duplexes, and we said the duplexes, what we were last told, will stay mostly on Main Street because people don't want them in the neighborhood. So if people don't want duplexes in their neighborhood, now we're gonna have
Little
garden
cottage,
apartments.
little
Oh, the
cottage.
cottages are okay, but what about the garden apartment buildings?
Well, it's just, those are examples of missing middle concepts.
Those are examples.
Right,
Whatever
I
we
know,
choose
but
to
it's
do
so
is,
great that someone will say, well, you allowed missing middle in your master plan, so I'm gonna come.
Well, that's
The
the
master plan
hard
is not the
list
zoning
of the
bylaw.
planning
I know.
board. The master plan is not going to give you all the answers for every decision you have to make. Sometimes you're just going to have to make decisions based on your impression or your perception of the zoning bylaws. The master plan is just to give you a sense of the town and what the people want. It's not gonna give you the black and white answers to the questions that are posed to you.
I know, but I just thought we were specific on some
And
things.
just so you all know, and again, you know, this, you know, I read this every day, you know, none of you have to do the deep dive as we talk about it, but you know, in our existing bylaw today, we have addressed, some of the, we've addressed it a little bit, some of missing, middle. We have, you know, because, I mean, we did a very comprehensive, study back in 2009. And, so you have cottage, dwelling units, that are allowed in the zoning bylaw. You have accessory dwelling units that are allowed in the zoning bylaw. You have, townhouse developments and, mixed-use developments. You know, that all gets to, you know, whether you wanna call it price points, missing middle, I mean, it all gets to, you know, that there are a variety of housing types that are allowed, in the existing zoning bylaw.
Certain zones though, I'm sure, right?
Yep, absolutely, in certain zones, and they've been modified over the years, and some have not been touched at all. No one has used, the cottage, development. We have someone that has started to talk about it, it's in a very specific area of town. We have a landowner that is starting to look into that, but, so I mean, you have some of it, it's not, it, you know, it might be a brand new concept to this particular group, but, you know, other groups in town that have talked about it, and it's been incorporated into, our, you know, the fabric of our community. You know, it's in the zoning bylaw.
Well, if it's already there, then do we need it in the master plan?
Well, like I just said though, it's not being used, so there's something wrong with it. It's just like the inclusionary zoning. There's not enough of a density bonus in the inclusionary zoning, it wasn't used.
So maybe
You
we
know,
should do
the-
explore missing middle versus.
Or improve.
All right, so we're at identify appropriate areas for the missing middle housing. Do people want to leave it in, or?
that's fine, that's fine, as is.
All right, so I have two people saying leave it, three saying leave it as is.
And
Just,
again, the key words, as we've always been going back to, is identify appropriate areas. There might be many, it's just not appropriate in these locations. You'd figure that out.
Right.
Step to-
okay. All right, okay.
We have some very hip zoning bylaws.
All right.
That we're ourselves.
All right, so we're already to number 3, on to number 4, Donnie.
Well, we went over 2-4, but 2-5, guided by zoning and design standards, incorporate housing into downtown to attract a sufficient number of residents that can supplement and support the area's economic viability.
Okay, and, I mean, keeping in mind, these are I mean, we've gone through these before. The survey,
Downtown,
nothing in
so-
the surveys have told us that we're off the mark.
Right.
So, I mean, did somebody, come to a realization that this is not a good idea? I mean, or should we just move on? Okay, I hear no objection, we're gonna move on. All right, number 6.
Determine the need for rental housing and approve such developments at a scale appropriate for the community.
I was thinking that probably is done with that market gap analysis, right? Isn't that kind of covered under H2.1? Or did they not think about rental?
Scale means size or number of units in this reference.
I mean, I wouldn't care if we took it out completely.
Yeah.
Development
It
at
could.
a scale
It could.
appropriate with
It could be included in there.
I felt like it was redundant, but.
It gets, depends on the question you ask in that market study. Are you looking at a broad spectrum to figure out all ranges, where they focus on, lowercase affordability, then it could. Or is that just an affordability focused study? It could be broadened, is the point.
I think what I was hearing Rick say was, it was broad. He wanted to know kind of all the needs in town.
How do people feel about just removing it as far as doing a rental housing study? I mean,
It would be in there.
I think it's addressed by the earlier.
okay, so by agreement, we'll take it out?
Yep.
Okay, thank you. All right, and then the last one, update the town's existing housing production plan. Okay, for the layperson, somebody has to tell us what that means.
We have one?
We need to do that. That should stay in.
So that's a thing, housing
Okay,
production
and
plan?
do we want to do update or periodic review?
No, it needs to be updated.
Okay, all right,
And-
okay,
We met our original housing production. We met the goals of it.
okay, now we have to do
Is
it.
update too simple? Does it need to be monitored? Does it need to be
It's
addressed?
broad, it's good.
Okay.
It's-
All right, so we stayed at 6 recommendations because we struck the original 5 and we added the bullet from 1 to make it its own
Right.
freestanding.
Right.
Number 6, though, can we, is that defined somewhere? What a housing production plan is? Because it sounds like something
We-
a
we-
developer has.
We can add it in.
We'll get it in there.
Yeah.
If it's not in there.
So basically, a state mandated report, and if you have one, the
It's
state
not in there now.
applies to the housing board, if you don't. Good to have one
All right,
in place on a regular basis.
okay, so just move, anyone in the audience have any questions or concerns about what we just discussed for goal number 2? Paul?
Yep, so just a general question about housing in the town. How does the town control housing price points, generally speaking?
It can.
Basically,
Doesn't.
does not.
No, I don't think a
The market.
municipality can, the market does.
Market determines price.
Through something like inclusionary zoning that would require those in place a certain number of units on a certain size of buildings to be placed on state guidelines to do it that way, rather than that. It's basically,
The market sets the rate.
the developer purchases property, figures he can make a buck selling certain houses at a certain price point. He proposes something that meets the zoning and he builds it.
So, the way we bring that down is maybe by partnering and trying to figure out how to make it enticing to them to make just as much money on less expensive housing.
Right, there are ideas in this section to try and get more involved in determining price points than we do now.
It's a good point though, because even, these are good attempts at us trying to get affordability, small A affordability, but they could do that cottage style housing and price it
Sure.
higher than a Northgate house, right? But
We won't be able to prevent developers from acquiring land, meeting the requirements and building.
Right.
But if we can get out ahead, we can have some people thinking about other ways to do this, and come up with some creative ways to engage developers in advance and say, here's a way you can make a buck and the town can get what it needs. That's something we don't do, and this is proposing we start to do it somehow.
And we can't really create zoning that limits how much money they can make or how expensive they can make the properties.
But is that in the form of like tax breaks or density bonuses? Like, how does that?
That's typically how it's been done, but that's not the only way to do it. And once again, this is proposing we look at some alternative ways of doing it besides typically tax breaks or density bonuses. But there's no doubt, builders aren't gonna build something just to donate housing to the town. They're gonna wanna make a buck on what they're doing. The question is there a way for the town and the builders to work together so everybody's happy?
All right, good, thank you, Rick.
Figure out how to do it.
Okay, all right, so, we have our
Six.
6 recommendations for goal number 2.
I move that they be adopted as amended.
Second.
Okay, that was a George seconding a Rick motion. No further discussion, all those in favor? All those opposed? All right, Amy and Rick, I didn't see your hand on either one.
Oh, I said aye.
Oh, okay.
Oh, I was abstaining, because I'm still.
Okay, so Amy did not vote on that one. Okay, so abstaining is usually meant that you have a conflict.
Oh, I know, but.
It's not a decision. It's,
I'd like to talk about some of this with the planning board. I mean, we talked about it last night, because it was recommendations weren't set yet. The planning board members said, well, the planning board was discussed on the page. And I don't know if we'll have time once they're decided on.
They're being decided on tonight.
Right, so.
We need to
Right.
make forward progress.
right,
I know.
but as a member of the planning board and their representative, you can voice what you think.
Right, right. And in the end.
Just like Michelle can
And
and
vote
George can.
accordingly.
In the end, whatever happens as far as zoning is going to be decided down the road. Doesn't
Right.
matter what the next thing says.
I think it's
Right,
Planning board will be decided.
right. Okay, all right. Okay, so.
So is it still, you're not voting? I just want to,
It's
get.
your
All right, I'll
preference.
look. It's gonna come to the planning board, yeah.
Well, I mean, the
So we'll
idea is,
talk about it further.
right, the idea is that when you get to the planning board, you're gonna vote for it
You
again.
can talk
Right.
about it further,
Okay.
but these aren't going to change until we leave here tonight. This is
Right.
going to be a master plan.
Right,
But the planning board, ultimately, no zoning will happen in town without the planning board
Right.
recommending
Right.
it, town meeting approval.
but.
But we'd
yeah,
love them to reference this document.
That's right. that's
I do
right.
all the time, which is why I'm concerned about what's in it.
All right, so being mindful of the time, we're gonna get to, the third housing goal of, to pursue a housing development strategy that balances demand with the town's capacity to provide services and infrastructure. Donnie?
First action, in coordination with public facilities and services, the recommendations therein, identify the town's capacity to service increased housing demands with expanded infrastructure. Refer to the cost of community services study referenced under land use action 1-1.
Okay. All right, so this is all about, build-out and our ability to,
ability to sustain town services to
whether it's water, sewer, roads, schools, all of it.
all of it.
Okay. All right. Number 2.
Revive the housing partnership to support established housing policies, monitor Northborough's housing needs, recommend actions to meet those housing needs, and evaluate funding sources available to create housing.
Okay.
This is probably the single most important recommendation.
Is the housing partnership the same as the housing partner production plan?
No, the housing partnership is a
committee.
committee.
Like open space committee or
There's
something
a,
like that.
there's guidelines from the state, as far as what.
Why don't we have one?
We used to have one, we used to have a very robust one. And,
That's why we don't have one now, just.
And, well, it got to the point where, they had, proposed zoning, it was incorporated into the zoning bylaws. There really wasn't much left to do at that point. And then sort of the CPA came along, and then there was I guess private is the
Right.
right way to call it, but.
The Northborough Housing.
The Northborough Affordable Housing Corporation was formed, and that took on a lot of the role, but they're truly focused on the actual development of housing. So you wanna, in my opinion, but I mean, it was the opinion of this group, you wanna get back to, now that you've got a new master plan and you've got all these, housing goals and recommendations, you wanna get back to, that being driven by your housing partnership.
And that's an
It's a-
appointed board?
Yeah, by the selectmen, it's a, under the guidance of the state. The only thing that I would say.
I just wonder why, if it was so important, why it died.
Well, it's not so much that it died, a lot of what, they put together a housing production plan. Prior to that, they put together a community housing plan for the community. Again, it was very robust, there was about 6-7 members. We, did a couple studies with consultants. Like I said, put forth, zoning bylaws that were adopted, at town meeting. And then, so it sort of got to the point where they had accomplished everything that they had originally set out to do. And towns aren't developers. Towns aren't good at being developers. So then like I said, along came the community preservation program, and then the housing corporation was formed. So we had also gone to town meeting to form a housing trust, which a lot of communities have, but what's worked better for this community was that it went, semi-private, and that's where the housing corporation was formed.
Michelle?
Why would you then have the housing partnership on the website? It's just, was never taken off?
Oh, yeah,
Okay.
we wouldn't, the selectmen wouldn't, it was kinda like, just went into, hiatus.
Dormancy.
Yeah,
Right.
dormancy.
Because supposedly they meet the third Thursday of the month at 7 PM.
Well,
Yeah.
that would be tomorrow if anybody wants to go.
No, there's
There's 3
several-
people.
Buy it right away.
Yeah, there's several.
But this is an inactive group.
There's
This is not-
right, there's
Yeah.
several boards and committees that are listed on the website that are
Just
inactive
revive.
at this
Yeah.
point.
All right,
Yeah.
okay, so
So
other than,
the only thing on this
Okay.
one, I would suggest is that, established housing policies. I don't think the town has any established housing policies.
so should we just revive the housing partnership?
And then to, maybe
Support
to,
and
no,
You should give us some direction.
to
what
say
we
to
provide.
establish housing policies,
Okay,
monitor Northborough housing needs.
Yeah, that sounds good.
And I know we voted on it, but would we tie the housing partnership to the housing production plan?
Yeah, they would be responsible for that, that's one of
That
the.
should be lumped in, should that be lumped in with H2
no,
6?
'cause
Well, no, because, again, I don't mean
That's
to
okay.
monopolize this, but in my opinion, if you end up for some reason not following through on this recommendation that we revive the housing partnership, you still wanna have a housing production plan. So they're not, they're not joined at the hip, but you would, if you had a housing partnership, they definitely would be responsible for the production plan.
Can I just ask a question? What would establish housing policies mean? What does that mean?
what kind of policies are we establishing, is that what you mean?
Yeah, I understand how this would be a great asset, especially for your office, Kathy, to help with, the housing needs, like monitoring stuff and all the other stuff, but what does housing policy mean? Is that just a larger, like a higher level, like master plan, like overview thing, or is it more into driving where zoning should go?
Well, yeah, I think zoning would come out of that. The housing partnership would, be using this master plan as a guide, and, and then,
Is it established versus advanced, or are they establishing the policies or advancing
Oh,
the
well,
actions?
yeah, that's-
I'm just
Are they
trying to get a
creating the
sense.
policies? Do they create the policies, or do they enforce the policies?
Or
Do they
advance
create the
actions.
policies?
well,
Planning board would be.
They don't
Do we-
enforce it.
I'm
Do
sorry.
can we revive the housing partnership to carry out the housing production plan?
No, because developers would
They don't have-
carry out the housing production plan, unless the town wants to get into the development.
Do we strike
affordable
that bit
housing.
about establish housing policies and the next line down, recommend policies and actions to meet housing
Yeah,
needs?
there you
Okay,
go.
okay,
Yeah,
So that's how it's written.
yeah, it's just
There
the way
you
it's
go.
written.
Yeah,
That is a sub-
Yeah, yeah.
okay. There you go.
Sending them to the planning board.
All right, revive the housing partnership to monitor Northborough
really
housing
busy.
needs, recommend
Soon.
policies and actions to
Not
meet
really,
housing
just give
needs,
these recommendations.
and evaluate funding available to create housing. A lot of housing in there.
It's all fine.
Okay, all right, is everybody okay with those two? All right. On those, before we vote on those two recommendations for the last housing goal, does anybody in the audience have any questions about that one section? Okay,
I move we adopt these two recommendations as
okay, Rick, Keith,
Second?
Jason, Perot, no further discussion, all those in favor? All right, everybody said aye. All right, well, we didn't get through everything, but we did do okay.
Good progress.
So, land use and housing is done, we have two left. Should we try 2 weeks from today, 2 weeks again? And then,
Date is that?
I don't know, I mean, I didn't necessarily 2 weeks exactly from today, I meant in 2 weeks. And then just tell me
Yeah,
what,
I mean, that would bring you to,
what, that's the week of what?
that would bring you to June fifth, the week of June third.
Week of
The
June.
third is Monday.
So, go back to a Tuesday night,
You could do Tuesday night.
Tuesday the 4th? How does that feel to people?
I'll be coming from the dentist, so that should be fine.
You're at the dentist?
This is just as painful, so you've
Oh.
I'm at the
already.
dentist earlier in the day, so yeah,
Rick, you're not
I'll,
here?
I'll compare and contrast.
If everybody else had any comments, I could just send them in. I'm
Okay.
not gonna be here the first 2 weeks of June.
Okay.
All right.
And Debbie can be here on,
June
Tuesdays.
fourth, Tuesday?
All right, so June 4th, we don't know where yet. Kathy will find out whether it's here or at the library.
Yep.
All right, and then we'll wrap
Does
this
that-
thing up.
Does that work for you guys?
Yeah.
Yeah.
June fourth?
Yeah, what I would suggest, that maybe, you, Fran, Rick, and I, we just talked about our schedule and timeline.
Yeah.
What meetings we're coming to, it would just be good for each of them as well.
Okay. All right.
So Kathy, when you were out, we were
Oh.
talking about the minutes, the May 9th minutes
Mm-hmm.
don't indicate that we reviewed and approved those 4 last sections
Oh,
of the plan.
All the motions
Oh.
and
The motions were
Yeah.
seconded and they
Yeah.
were.
All right, no, I'll have Deb.
All right, so
There
we,
was something, when I read it, there was something mentioned about something being attached to the minutes which weren't attached to the electronic version. I don't know if there was something else that was in that wasn't attached.
Okay.
One way or another, the minutes have to reflect that we took action
Oh,
to
yeah.
approve those 4 sections.
Absolutely, so those were the May 9th?
yes, we did approve the March 7th. Rick motioned and George seconded, and so we approved the March 7th ones.
Okay.
So the 9th, May 9th are holding. All right, so our next meeting, we're gonna do economic development and the natural, cultural, historic. We're going to hopefully review the May 9th. And
Yep, you'll have them in the 22nd, each days.
It's my understanding that after we've gone through and approved all these sections, that really the committee isn't going to meet again until you guys have been taking all of this and come up with a complete draft master plan, which will probably be in the fall sometime.
No, I think we were talking about having,
Over the summer.
yeah,
Right,
Barbecue.
right,
right.
right, and then after that, it goes to the, right, and after that, it goes to the Board of Selectmen and
June
planning board.
4th meeting,
Yeah,
if that-
later.
everything's
Later in the
completed,
summer.
then the committee will just be waiting to get back to draft.
Yeah, I mean, we'll work out, again, we'll talk about that too, but I think sometime mid to late summer would have this all put together. Yeah, we need a month or two, sometime in summer.
Okay, right.
When is the 12th month? When do we start this?
We're past the 12th one.
Yeah,
I want overtime.
you're on
Open my
overtime.
rate group up.
There you go.
All right,
Bye, George.
anything else?
You don't know if we moved into the open space plan.
Motion to adjourn?
I do know.
All right, George and Rick did the motion to adjourn. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye, okay.
Ciao,
Everybody-
friends.